When my younger brother Grant came to visit from Denver, he froze in the middle of a house that used to be full of laughter. No chairs, no table, no photo of my husband on the wall. No familiar smell of food, just the cold hum of an empty refrigerator and the weak breathing of a mother who's lived 70 years. Grant turned back to me, eyes red. "Paula, you're living like this? With a $7,000 pension each month?" Before I could answer, Nolan, my son, stepped out from the other room, arms crossed, and said in a flat voice like he was stating a fact, "I give all of Mom's pension to my wife. She manages it better than Mom." The air in the house froze. Grant stood still for a few seconds, then slowly took off his coat, folded it neatly, his eyes calm to the point of frightening. And what he did next would paralyze Nolan and turn this house into a crime scene of truth. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I'm Paula Whitaker, 70, a widow, living in a small house in the suburbs of Kansas City, Missouri. This two-story place was where my husband Robert and I built our life, with a lavender garden he tended every morning. After Robert passed, I lived alone for more than 10 years, relying on a $7,000 monthly pension from my 42 years as head nurse at St. Mary's Hospital. I never imagined that at this age, in the middle of America, I could be hungry. When Grant stepped through the door, I saw raw confusion in his eyes. He walked a circle around the living room, scanning as if searching for something familiar. The gray fabric sofa that used to sit under the window, the oak dining table Robert and I bought when we first married, the wedding photo in the hallway. All of it gone. He opened the fridge. Empty. Only an expired carton of milk, half a stick of butter, and a packet of instant noodles. The kitchen was dead cold. No coffee smell, no toaster sound, no sign of life in the house that had once been the warmest place I knew. Grant turned back, his voice rough. "Paula, where are you? Where's the sister I know? Tell me what's going on here." I could only press my lips together. Any excuse felt small under the gaze of the person who once called me the strongest big sister in the world. I didn't have the strength to explain. I just looked around the empty house and wondered, how did I let it come to this? Then Nolan appeared. My only son, now 38, walked out with a confident posture and a thin smile. Grant looked at him, waiting for an explanation. And Nolan said, in a tone so casual it was chilling, "I give all of Mom's pension to Sloan. She manages it better than Mom. Mom just needs to rest and stay out of the money stuff." Grant blinked, stunned. He looked up at me, waiting for my reaction, but I just stood there too exhausted to argue. Nolan sat down, poured himself a glass of water, while I watched my thin hands start to shake. I knew Grant wanted to explode, but instead he slowly took off his coat, folded it neatly, and set it on the table. His eyes were dangerously calm, the kind of calm that means the truth is about to surface. "All right," he said quietly. "We're going to talk, but not the way you think." No one in that house understood that moment was the starting point for turning my entire life back over. Before Grant arrived, I had lived through 13 months of hell in my own home. After Nolan lost his job, he and his wife Sloan moved in for a few months to save on rent. I believed that. I still remember the day they moved in, Sloan smiling sweetly, saying, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll help with cooking and cleaning. We'll be like a big family." I believed her. I believed everything. But a few months quickly turned into, "We're staying." Soon, I was pushed out of my own master bedroom to make room for them. I moved into the smaller room, telling myself, that's what a mother should do. Then it started. Sloan suggested I hand my bank card to Nolan so he can feel useful. I hesitated, but seeing my son slumped on the couch, head down, shoulders shaking with the weight of unemployment, I couldn't say no. I handed over the card. And with it, I handed over my financial freedom. At first, things seemed fine. Bills were paid on time, the fridge was stocked. Nolan even gave me $100 and said, "Buy yourself something nice." But a few weeks later, the account password was changed, and I couldn't see the statements anymore. When I asked, Nolan laughed. "Don't worry, Mom, I manage it better. Seniors get scammed a lot, let me handle it." I wanted to believe, so I kept quiet. The food started to thin out. The things I liked disappeared. Chicken, salmon, fresh fruit. In their place were instant noodles, crackers, and what Sloane called a light dinner. Whenever I asked why, she said, "At your age, eating less is healthy and fresh stuff is expensive." I didn't realize I was being starved on purpose. The house was stripped bit by bit. The sofa where Robert read the paper, the oak table where we hosted Christmas, the wedding photo, the keepsakes from a lifetime of work, all gone to cover expenses. So I started keeping notes. I hid a small notebook in an old drawer where I wrote down dates, amounts, and what had disappeared. I also hid a backup phone just to photograph and record conversations when I knew something was wrong. I thought I was being cautious. Like Robert used to say, "No one protects you better than you, Paula." But honestly, I just wanted to believe that if anything happened, at least I'd have proof, and a thin hope that someone would notice I was being worn down. That someone turned out to be Grant. Grant has always been perceptive. After Robert passed, he called often, but for more than half a year I dodged his calls, always saying I was busy or fine. I was afraid that if he came, he'd see what I couldn't face, but he came anyway. And what he saw in this house, the emptiness, the cold, and my hollowed-out face, told him it wasn't just a rough patch. I remember that moment like a photograph. The late-day light slanting through the window onto the bare floor, and Grant saying quietly, "Paula, this isn't a family issue anymore. This is a crime." He pulled out his phone and called the two people he trusted most, attorney Arthur Hale, Robert's old friend, and doctor Camila Ortiz, a geriatric specialist he'd worked with in an elder care program. I didn't stop him. I just sat there, hands clasped, heart beating slow and heavy. From the moment Grant hung up, I knew my silent, compliant life was over. Today, every word and every invisible scar would be brought into the light. A knock came just minutes later. Grant turned to me, voice firm but gentle. "Sis, today is the day this ends. They turned you into a shadow, but I'm going to bring you back to yourself." I gripped the edge of the chair, looking around the empty house. For the first time in months, the air felt different. Not the cold smell of an empty fridge, but the scent of hope slipping back in. I lifted my head, squared my shoulders, and let out a long breath. "All right," I said, voice low but clear. "If the truth needs telling, I'll tell it. From the beginning. From the day I thought my love could fix everything." And so, in an empty house in Kansas City, my story began, the story of a mother who loved her son so much she lost herself, and the journey to reclaim her life from her own misplaced trust. I once believed that if I worked hard and lived decently, life would return fairness. Across 42 years as a nurse at Lakeview Community Hospital, I worked through countless night shifts, blaring sirens and hands that went cold in my arms. I was used to the smell of antiseptic, the squeak of gurney wheels on, tile, the white lights falling on faces, waiting to be saved. People used to ask me, "Paula, aren't you afraid of night shifts?" I smiled. I was afraid of the dark, but I was more afraid of not being there to help someone through it. I started at the hospital when I was 28, 2 years after marrying Harold. He was a civil engineer. I worked odd hours, often going in at dusk and coming home when the sun was up. Whenever I came home, he'd leave a warm pot of coffee and a note on the kitchen table. "Remember to eat breakfast. I left bread in the toaster." Our life was simple but full. Harold wasn't a talker, but his eyes were gentle, like every bit of my exhaustion was worth it. Then, one April morning, a light rain falling, I was handing off a shift when a call came from an unfamiliar number. The voice on the line shook. "Mrs. Whitaker, I'm sorry. Your husband had a massive heart attack. We did everything we could." I collapsed in the hospital. The hallway, the place where I'd saved so many lives, but this time, the one who left was part of me. By the time I arrived, they said he'd only had time to say one last line to the attending doctor. "Tell my wife I'm proud of her. I've carried that sentence ever since." I don't remember how I got through the days that followed. The funeral passed quickly. Friends, co-workers, neighbors came to offer condolences, then left. I cleaned the house we used to laugh in and folded shirts that still smelled like his cologne. I thought that without Nolan, I might not have had a reason to get up in the morning. Nolan was 22 then, a senior majoring in business. He had Harold's calm and thoughtful eyes. I poured my love and my grief into him. Every time I went to work, I told myself, one more shift, one more week, so my son won't go without. I took more nights, cut every personal expense, hardly went out. No new dresses, no hair dye, no vacations for nearly 10 years. Everything so Nolan could graduate and go further than I ever could. I remember his graduation day clearly. I went straight from the hospital to the auditorium, still in my scrub top that smelled like rubbing alcohol. When Nolan stepped up to receive his diploma, he scanned the room and found me standing in the back, smiling with tired eyes. He held the diploma high and shouted, "Mom, I did it." The whole hall clapped. I smiled too, tears falling before I could wipe them. For the first time in years, my effort felt like it meant something. After that, Nolan quickly landed a job at a well-known logistics firm in the city. I was proud he was young, capable, full of promise. He started talking about the future, about getting married, buying a house. I nodded, both happy and anxious. I still remember the night he brought her home. "Sloane Parker, someone I met at a client conference," he said. "She's in marketing, smart and ambitious." Sloane reached out to shake my hand, voice soft but cool. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Whitaker." She was beautiful. Brown hair perfectly curled, a cream silk dress, expensive perfume. Her gaze made me feel both seen and judged. I kept a polite smile, poured tea, and tried to believe every modern woman carries a bit of pride. That night, while washing dishes, I asked Nolan, "Are you sure? She seems a little cold." He laughed. "Mom, she's just guarded. Sloane lost her parents early. She's been on her own since she was young. I think you'll like her." I didn't want to disappoint him. I figured maybe she just needed love. I'd read somewhere that people who act tough are often the most afraid of being hurt. So I opened my heart and welcomed Sloane like the daughter I never had. 6 months later, they married in a small but elegant ceremony at St. Andrews. I covered half the wedding cost, the savings from nearly 20 years of extra shifts, because I wanted Nolan to have a beautiful start. I remember the moment he held his bride's hand, eyes bright like the world had just opened wide. I stood in the church hallway watching them walk out under falling petals, feeling both happy and empty. The only man I ever loved now lay under cold earth, and my only son was starting his own life. After the ceremony, Sloane said to me, "I don't have parents anymore. Could you think of me as your daughter?" I nodded, moved. "Of course, Sloane. Your family." She smiled, but in that smile was a fleeting chill. The early months after the wedding were peaceful. Every Sunday, they came for dinner with pastries or wine. They talked about work, plans, and sometimes Sloane would say softly, "I hope we have a baby soon so you won't be lonely." Those words softened me. I started to picture a grandchild running through the lavender, laughter filling the gaps between me and my solitude. Time passed and everything seemed perfect. Nolan advanced. Sloane was praised at work. I was proud of. them and kept my simple life. Until one December afternoon, Nolan showed up pale. I was prepping dinner when the door opened fast and he dropped into a chair, head in his hands. "What happened?" I asked, heart racing. He looked up, eyes red. "They cut staff, they're closing our branch. I lost my job, Mom." I stood still. My son, the one who promised he'd take care of me, was slumped in front of me like a lost boy. I put my hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, son. It's temporary. You're good at what you do." He shook his head. "I've got a car loan, apartment rent. Sloane's going to be so disappointed." I heard fear in his voice. Not fear of unemployment, fear of losing the image, Sloane admired. That night, I didn't sleep. I made coffee and watched the city lights. The worry for my son rose in me like a tide. As a mother, nothing hurts more than seeing your child despair. I thought of my night shifts, of staying awake to save strangers, and told myself, if I could save them, I can save my own son. The next day, Nolan said they'd move in for a few months to save on rent. I agreed immediately, without hesitation. Deep down, a small warning flickered, the kind you get after seeing too many tragedies in a hospital, but I pushed it away. I saw one thing: my son needed me. And like always, I was ready to do anything to help him get back up. I didn't know that in that moment, that harmless nod, I opened the door to a nightmare that would last more than a year, where I'd lose money, memories, and finally, myself. Back then, I believed that if a mother just loved enough, the family would hold together. I didn't know some children don't need more love, they just want full control of what's in their mother's hands. And that was the beginning of everything. "Just a few months, Mom. Once I find a new job, Sloane and I will move out." When Nolan said it, it sounded light as air, and I sleepless for nights. Worrying about him nodded right away. I had no idea that from that moment on, my two-story home, the one holding my life and my memories with Harold, would stop being home in the way it used to be. I remember the morning they moved in. Nolan brought a few suitcases. Sloane drove a white luxury car with the trunk full of pricey luggage, high heels, handbags, and boxes of makeup. She beamed, sweet as honey. "Thank you, Mom. It feels so peaceful here, like a little vacation." I smiled, trying to believe my daughter-in-law was truly grateful. I took them upstairs to the room that used to be mine and Harold's. It still smelled like oak and old sunlight. I meant to keep it, but Nolan put a hand on my shoulder. "This room is bigger. You should stay downstairs for convenience. Sloane and I need space for work, and it's easier for me to take care of you." It sounded so reasonable I didn't argue. I packed up and moved to the small room on the first floor that used to be storage. That first night, Sloane cooked meatballs in tomato sauce, a recipe I learned from a friend's mom in Texas. She smiled brightly, wore a brand new apron, and told me to sit and relax. Watching her move around the kitchen warmed me. I imagined Harold smiling somewhere too. Dinner was lovely. We talked about Nolan applying to new companies, about starting over. I slept better than I had in months. But the peace didn't last. By the second week, I heard Sloane's complaints. "You buy this kind of toilet paper, Paula?" My skin reacts. Then, "The kitchen stuff is too old, let's replace everything." "Gas stoves aren't safe." She stopped calling me Mom and switched to Paula. Every time I heard it, I felt pushed out of my own family. I tried to stay polite, cleaning, cooking, doing laundry, even as I got weaker. One day, I found Sloane opening my bedroom without knocking. She gave a little laugh. "Oh, I just needed scissors. Don't worry, think of me like a daughter." I forced a smile, but it pinched. That was the only room left that felt like it was mine. One evening, while I was mending an old sweater, Nolan came in. He looked exhausted, dark circles heavy under his eyes. "Mom," he hesitated, "I know you keep your pension in your account." If you let me manage it for now, you won't have to worry about bills, property tax, insurance. I can help you keep things organized so you can relax." I looked at my son, the one who cried in my arms at his father's funeral, and my heart softened. "Are you sure, Nolan?" "I don't want to be a burden." He smiled and held my hand. "Do you trust me?" "I just want you to rest. Let me be useful." So I agreed. The next morning I handed him my bank card and quietly told him the PIN. I didn't realize I was handing over the last key to my freedom. The first week went fine. Bills were paid, the fridge was full, and Nolan gave me $100. "I know you like flowers. Go to the market, you need a little joy." I smiled. Maybe I'd worried too much. But by the third week, I couldn't access my bank account. When I asked, Nolan answered gently, "I changed the password, Mom. The bank requires two-factor now. I'll manage it. You don't need to worry." I hesitated, then nodded. I always thought trusting my son was the right thing. Meals started changing, no more roast or beef stew smells. Instead, instant noodles, crackers, and quick bites. Sloan said, "Too much fat isn't good for older folks. You should simplify your portions." I gave a thin smile, even as my stomach growled every night. One morning, I went to the market to buy fruit. When I swiped my card, the machine said, "Insufficient funds." I froze. In my whole working life, I'd never heard those words. At home, I asked Nolan. He spoke quickly. "I pulled some out to pay off a credit card. Don't worry, I'll put it back soon." I stayed quiet. I didn't want to turn dinner into a fight. Meanwhile, Sloan started showing up with new things. Designer handbags, fresh dresses, red-soled heels I'd only seen in magazines. She said, "A friend gifted them. She works at an outlet." I knew outlets don't hand out gifts like that, but I said nothing. I kept thinking if I stayed quiet, things would get better. Nolan changed too. He dressed sharper, said he had interviews. When I asked where, he spoke vaguely. At night, I sat in my small room listening to their laughter upstairs, the pop of a wine cork, the TV. I told myself, my son is still happy. That's enough. Food kept shrinking, fruit disappeared, milk became rare. I got used to one small meal or splitting a packet of noodles to last the day. My body weakened, but I didn't speak up. I feared loneliness more than hunger. I was afraid if I complained, they'd leave and the house would be as empty as those first years after Harold died. Sometimes friends called to check in. I always said, "I'm fine, my son moved back in. It's wonderful." I heard my own voice shake, like I was telling someone else's story. One afternoon, I noticed the brass lamp Harold bought in 1985 was gone. When I asked, Sloan said casually, "I sold it. Old wiring, no one uses it. Got over $100 for it." I stayed silent. A few days later, the oak table was gone. Then the sofa set. Then our wedding frame. I looked around and saw only my fingernail marks left on the wall where that photo used to hang. That night, while they went out to dinner with friends, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the empty room. The yellow bulb spilled over, peeling paint, and in the fridge door's reflection I saw a thin old woman with frizzy hair, wearing a sweater with a worn neckline. I tried to remember the last time I heard myself laugh, maybe the first night they moved in. I sat there a long time. Then I opened the drawer and took out a small brown notebook where I began recording every detail: the date, the time, the amount of money, the item that disappeared. An old nurse's habit: write everything down in case you need to check later. I didn't think of it as evidence, just thought that if I started to forget someday, I'd still know what had happened. But the more I wrote, the more I realized the empty space in my life was widening, like a cut silently spreading. Every page was one lost item, one more piece of control taken, and one part of my dignity erased. That night, I wrote one line in red ink. June 12th, lost the wedding photo frame. Don't know if they sold it, but for sure I lost more than that. And I understood. Maybe everything really had started slipping out of my hands. I don't remember the exact day I began to suspect, only that one morning, when the sun just touched the window frame, I decided to withdraw a little cash to buy fruit and flowers for Harold's altar. It had been a long time I'd been living on whatever portions they gave me. I put on my old coat, went to the ATM near the supermarket, slid in my card, and entered the PIN. The screen lit up, then stopped at $37. I thought I read it wrong. I pulled out the card, wiped my glasses, and tried again. Same thing. $37 when I get a $7,000 pension each month, deposited automatically on the 10th. It was only the 16th. I stood frozen at the machine, my hands shaking so hard I had to grip the edge of the keypad. Someone behind me urged me to hurry, so I bowed my head, pulled the card, and staggered outside. The midday sun was glaring, but I felt as cold as if I'd just walked out of a morgue. When I got home, Nolan was watching TV, feet up on the table, headphones on. I set my bag down and asked straight out, "Nolan, I just checked my account. There's $37 left. Explain." He didn't look at my dazeft. Plammy just pulled out an earbud and shrugged. "I pulled some out for a bit, Mom. Had to cover some debts. You wouldn't get it. Times are tough." I tried to stay calm. "How much did you take?" He turned, eyes sharpening. "Can you stop nitpicking? You live in this house and don't lack anything, and you still nag. You're selfish." I was speechless. Selfish. That word felt like a knife to the chest. Me, the one who raised him with calloused hands, who pulled triple shifts so he could pay tuition, now called selfish by my own son. The next day was my close friend Maggie's birthday, a former coworker from the hospital. For 30 years, we'd always exchanged small gifts, a bouquet, a book. I said, "Nolan, I want to take out a little money to buy Maggie a gift, just $20. He was holding his phone, didn't bother to look up. "No, I'm cycling that money." "You don't need to give gifts anymore. It's enough that they know you're broke." I went quiet. Not because I was broke, but because I knew there was nothing left to say. My meals shrank to the point of ridiculous. Half a packet of instant noodles split into 2 meals, a little boiled greens, sometimes a leftover cracker. I ate slowly, stretching each bite so I wouldn't feel like I was being starved. Once, I asked, "Sloan, why is there no fruit, milk, or meat lately?" She gave a small smile without looking up from her phone. "At your age, eating less is healthier. Too much protein tires the heart. I'm just thinking about you." I knew that was an excuse. Every night they ordered takeout pizza, lobster, pasta. I sat in my room and smelled the grease drift down the hallway, my stomach growling, my heart pounding. Once, I heard Sloan laugh loudly. "Good thing she doesn't eat much. If she ate like us, we'd never have enough money." They both laughed. I lay still in the dark, tears soaking the pillow, not sure if it was from hunger or humiliation. My weight plummeted, 35 pounds lost in under half a year. I got dizzy whenever I stood up. I ran out of blood pressure meds and asked Nolan, "Can you buy my prescription for me? The old script is in the drawer." He said, "It's expensive. I'll order it online when there's a sale." 3 weeks passed, no meds. I started having trouble breathing. In the mornings, my heart raced, but I still tried to smile whenever they walked by. I didn't want them to see I was weak. Weak people get discarded. One afternoon, Maggie came to visit. She brought apple pie, my favorite. When she stepped in, I was so happy I almost cried. But before I could say anything, Sloan came down the stairs, a pasted-on smile. "Hi there, she's really tired. Please let her rest. She can't eat sweets." Maggie looked at me with worried eyes, but I only managed a small nod, pretending to agree. Sloan took the bag with the pie, gave one more smile, then saw my friend out. When the door closed, I heard the paper bag hit the trash can. That night I sat in my room, the light so dim my shadow stretched long across the wall. I realized they were isolating me on purpose. No one could see me. No one knew what was happening in this house. I was no longer the homeowner, no longer a mother, just a faint shape living on the pity of the very people draining me. I started keeping a journal. Each page had 3 columns: date, meal, amount. I logged it carefully like the old days as a nurse, tracking vitals and meds. April 14th. Ate half a packet of noodles. $0. April 15th. 8 crackers, water. $0. April 16th. Nolan withdrew more money, said property taxes. No documentation. My journal thickened day by day, like a treatment chart for a patient being treated with cruelty. I didn't know why I was writing, maybe to remember, maybe to prove I existed and how I was treated. Then one sleepless night, I sat by the window, watching the streetlight's yellow glow slip through the curtain. In my head, I heard Harold, what he told me before he died. "Paula, don't let anyone turn your kindness into a weapon." My hands shaking, I opened the drawer and took out the backup phone I'd hidden since the day Nolan moved in. I turned on the recorder. From that day, I started recording every conversation in the house. When Nolan told Sloane, "She's old, she won't remember anything." When Sloane said, "Let her eat less, we'll save a ton." When they talked about accounts, about selling a few antique pieces. I kept the phone in my coat pocket, pretending to tidy up, or sat and read. Their voices slipped into the mic, clear enough to chill me. Some nights I played it back, my chest aching like it was being squeezed. I didn't recognize my son's voice anymore. He used to say, "I love you more than anything." Now it was flat, calculating, indifferent. I began to change. No arguing, no asking, no crying. I just observed, wrote, and moved like a ghost in my own house. In the mornings, I still greeted them with a smile. At night, when they slept, I quietly checked old email statements I still had access to. The numbers drained away like water through fingers. More than $90,000 gone. I didn't know where it went, only saw charges for boutique, design project, renovation. I understood. This wasn't about Nolan struggling anymore. This was a deliberate plan. By month 13, I stood in front of the mirror and didn't recognize myself. Wrinkled face, gray hair, sunken eyes, sallow skin. The woman in the mirror looked like a patient I'd once cared for, except I had no one caring for me. That night, I added to the journal. Month 13, $37 left. No one knows. No one asks. I'm not afraid anymore. I just want to live long enough to watch them fall. And I swore, with whatever strength I had left, that I would not let Harold be ashamed of his wife. I would live. I would remember. And when the time came, I would make them pay for every packet of noodles I swallowed with tears. I don't know how Grant figured it out. Maybe the calls I kept dodging, the "I'm fine," I said too quickly, or just a brother's instinct built from growing up together. Either way, that morning when the door swung open, I saw Grant standing there in the doorway, eyes horrified as if he'd walked into something unbelievable. He didn't speak. He just stood there. Morning light poured across the threshold, lighting the room where my wedding photo with Harold used to hang, now just a bare wall pocked with nail marks. No chairs, no table, no sign of life. He walked in slowly, shoes tapping the cold wooden floor. I lay on a bare mattress, wrapped in a thin towel, shivering because the wind had slipped through the window gap the night before. Grant's eyes stopped on my gaunt body. Then he turned away, like he didn't want me to see his tears. "Paula," his voice broke, "you're living like this?" I tried to say I'm fine, but my throat locked. I wasn't fine, and we both knew it. Grant went to the kitchen and opened the fridge. 1 bottle of water, an empty butter tub, half an onion. He opened a cabinet, then turned to me, voice low and sharp as a knife. You get a $7,000 pension each month, right? I nodded. Then where's the money? Before I could answer, Nolan came downstairs, shirt unbuttoned, hair messy, face annoyed from being woken early. What's going on? Grant turned to face his nephew head on. You want to know what's going on? I want to know why my sister is living like a homeless person in her own house. Nolan smirked, arms crossed. Mom gives me all her pension. I just use it to invest so the whole family benefits. And those old things we sold them to clear space. He said it as calmly as well, if he were talking about the weather. Grant was quiet for a few seconds. Then he slowly took off his coat, folded it neatly, and set it on the empty table. His eyes were calm, but underneath was a banked fury waiting to blow. He spoke slowly, enunciating each word. You just confessed, Nolan. And before we go any further, let me remind you everything you say is being remembered. Sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom, it comes from someone who stands up and says, enough. Did your chest tighten when Grant said that? Write your thoughts about that moment. I want to know if you felt the power of calm the way I did. Sloane came down the stairs in a silk robe, coffee cup in hand. She looked around, annoyed. What's with all the noise? We have guests. Grant turned a cold smile. Oh, you must be Sloane. Good, this is convenient. I'm Grant Whitaker, Paula's brother. I'm here to take my sister's life back. I gave Grant a small nod. It was time. In my hand was the backup phone I'd hidden for over a year, holding all the recordings, photos of the things sold, and copies of bank statements. I set it on the table, light as placing a bomb. Grant looked at me, his eyes softening. You did well. Nolan forced a laugh. Mom recorded what? Come on, Mom. You're old. You think you're a detective? Grant answered for me, his voice oddly calm. No, but the police might be interested now. The air in the house thickened. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Grant pulled out his phone and dialed. Arthur, I need you here now. Sloane and Nolan are both here, and bring a doctor, my sister's depleted. 20 minutes later, attorney Arthur Hale Harold's old friend and Dr. Camila Ortiz arrived. Arthur wore a gray suit, steady as ever. Camila had a stethoscope and quick professional eyes. Arthur looked around and sighed. I never thought I'd be back here, like this. He turned to Nolan and Sloane. We need all of Mrs. Whitaker's bank statements and transfer records for the past 12 months. Right now. Nolan reacted like he'd been struck. I'm not obligated to, Grant cut in, voice low and firm. Yes, you are. This is my mother's property. She's in a state of malnutrition and financial exploitation. If you don't cooperate, I'm calling the police. Sloane tried to look composed, but her lips trembled. You're slandering us. Paula gave money to her son. That's not a crime. Arthur set his briefcase on the table, opened it sheet by sheet. True, but exploiting an elder's assets through coercion and financial control is a federal offense, and I believe we have enough evidence here. Doctor. Camila knelt beside me, took my blood pressure, and asked quietly, How have you been eating? I gave a small smile. Half a packet of noodles a day. She shook her head, jotted notes, then said softly to Arthur, Stage 2 malnutrition. She needs to be admitted soon. Nolan started to unravel. You don't understand. I was just trying to help my mom. I'll print the statements later. Grant stepped forward, facing my son head on. No. Right now. Sloane set the cup down and stepped in front of her husband, voice rising. You don't get to order people around in this house. Grant answered crisply. This house is in Paula's name. And right now, she's been stripped of control by you two. I have every right to protect her. Arthur plugged the USB I'd handed him into his laptop. The screen filled with audio files, photos, and old statements. In one recording, Sloane's voice was crystal clear, Let her eat less. She's old, eating more is just a waste of money. Then Nolan's voice. Selling the stuff in the house is fine. She doesn't use it. The room went silent. Sloane went pale. Nolan lowered his head, lips pressed tight. Arthur stopped the audio and looked up, his voice calm, but cold. I'll give you a chance to cooperate. Provide all bank statements, investment details, and a list of items sold. If not, I'll forward this file to the Kansas City police today. I looked at my son, the one who cried in my arms at his father's funeral, now just a stranger shrinking in a chair. I didn't feel angry anymore. Just a hollow ache. Sloane tried to salvage it. We just wanted to invest in a store. It was going to help the whole family. Arthur said nothing, just held up a sheet. These are purchase orders and credit card receipts in your name, drawn from Mrs. Whitaker's account. I count more than $90,000. You still want to call that investment? No one answered. Grant hit record on his phone. From now on, everything you say will be saved. I pulled out a small paper. I'd prepared the backup password to my old statement email. I set it on the table. Here, I said, voice hoarse but clear. If they delete anything, there's still a copy. I'm not as foolish as they think. Grant gave a small smile, not happy but relieved. He turned to me. You did great, Paula. Now they know the helpless prey still has teeth. The room's energy shifted. Nolan and Sloane were no longer in control. Their eyes darted like cornered animals. Arthur gathered the files and said briefly, "The police will be in touch soon. First, Mrs. Whitaker needs to be taken to the hospital. I'll arrange it now." When they left, I looked around the empty room. Same four walls, but for the first time in 13 months, I felt my own breath return. I turned to Grant. He took my hand and squeezed. "Sis," he said, "you're not alone anymore." I nodded, eyes stinging. Outside, the Kansas sky was gray and the wind cut cold, but in my chest a light flickered back on. For the first time, I wasn't afraid. I just felt calm, because I knew the nightmare had finally started to be stopped. Arthur had just collected the debt acknowledgement when he paused, eyes landing on a stack of papers Nolan had left half-tucked in a folder. "Let me see that." Nolan flinched. "That's just some broker flyers." Arthur opened it and flipped quickly through. Then he stood still for a few seconds, taking a deep breath. "No, not flyers. This is a preliminary brokerage agreement from Greenfield Realty proposing to sell this house for $239,500. Plan to list officially in 3 weeks." The air around me felt heavy. A chill ran down my spine. "Sell? The house?" I blurted, almost in disbelief. "But this is my house. I never signed anything." Arthur nodded slightly, his voice metallic. "I know, and that's the problem." He pulled a few more sheets from the folder photocopies with a faint blue stamp. "The signature here says Paula Whitaker," he pointed out the strokes, "but it's nothing like your real signature. This is forgery. They weren't just taking your accounts, they planned to sell your property." Grant slammed his hand on the table, making Sloane's coffee cup shatter on the floor. "God! My sister was about to be thrown out on the street?" His voice shook with fury, somehow still cold and controlled. Nolan shot up. "It's not like that. I just wanted to sell and buy a smaller place. It'd be easier. She doesn't need a big house." Grant spun around, eyes blazing. "What did you just say? She doesn't need? Listen to yourself. You call that love?" Arthur cut in, voice low and sharp as a blade. "You've just admitted to attempting to sell an elder's property without legal authorization. In Missouri, that falls under elder financial abuse, and combined with forged signatures, this is forgery, a criminal offense." Nolan went pale. He looked to Sloane for help, but she had her head down, hands shaking. Arthur closed the folder and slid it back toward them. "Before I hand all of this to the Kansas prosecutors, I'm giving you one last chance." He looked straight at Nolan. "You will sign a written admission of what you did. Agree to a repayment plan of $1,400 a month for 54 months, and leave this house within 2 hours. If not, this goes to the district attorney today." The room fell into a deadly silence. I heard wind whistling through the window seam, the clock ticking, and my own heart pounding. Nolan trembled, trying to take Sloane's hand, but she pulled away. "I'm your family," he cried, voice cracking with desperation. Grant, who had stood still till then, turned slowly. His voice was deep and resonant, each word etched into the tile. "Family doesn't starve each other. Family doesn't take the last dollar from the woman who gave them life to buy handbags and designer dresses." Nolan hung his head. For the first time I saw him cry, not from deep remorse, but because he knew he'd lost it all. His reputation, his money, and his mother's trust. Sloane wiped her tears. We just wanted a chance. We thought we could restart. I didn't think it would get this bad." Arthur answered evenly. "A chance is not stealing someone else's future, Mrs. Paula gave you a chance the day you stepped into this house and you tore it up yourself." I looked at them, feeling hollow. Memories flooded in. The warm wedding, Nolan's smile at graduation, the morning I baked bread the first time Sloane called me Mom. Now it was all dust. I spoke, quiet but clear. "Your chance was built on my instant noodles, on nights I curled up listening to you laugh upstairs. If that's love, then I pray no one ever loves me like that again." Nolan broke down crying, fell to his knees, but Grant didn't budge. He pulled out a chair, set the paper on the table, and pushed a pen toward them. "Right, now." Nolan's hand shook as he picked up the pen. Sloane bit her lip, tears falling onto the page and blurring the ink. Arthur checked his watch. "You have exactly 2 hours to pack up. After that, the police will arrive. I don't want to see either of you within 10 miles of Mrs. Paula's house." No one answered. Grant turned to Arthur, speaking low. "Make sure they don't have time to delete data or pull more money." Arthur nodded. "I've already sent a temporary freeze request. All accounts connected to Sloane Boutique and Nolan Jenkins will be locked within 24 hours. Dr. Camila stood by, resting a hand on my shoulder. "You need to go to the hospital now. I don't want your blood pressure over 160 for another minute." I nodded and slowly stood. My legs trembled, but they were steadier than ever before. "Grant helped me into my coat," he murmured. "You finished the hardest part. Now it's time to take back what's yours." I looked around the room one more time, bare. Walls, cold wood floors, a place that once held laughter now echoing with the sound of justice. Arthur gathered the files and sealed all the evidence. Statements, brokerage papers, forged POA, the audio files. He labeled it Evidence, Case Hash 27104. The rip of the tape sounded like sealing an old era, the era of trust betrayed. Sloane sank into a chair, face in her hands. Nolan stood frozen, as if all the strength had been drained from him. I said nothing more. Not because I had no words, but because my silence was the heaviest sentence I could deliver. Grant opened the door. Noon sunlight spilled in, golden across the floor. I turned back one last time, then stepped out. "Behind me," Arthur said firmly. "From now on, everything goes by the law." My steps were slow but no longer shaky. Each one sloughed off a bit of weight. I was no longer the woman forced to live in the dark, surviving on instant noodles. I was Paula Whitaker, who had passed through hunger and humiliation, and still stood up in the light. Grant's car was waiting at the curb. As I sat down, Dr. Camila wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my wrist one last time. "Still high, but more stable. Probably the adrenaline," she said, then smiled. "Or because you just won the first round." I looked out the window. Inside the house, 2 silhouettes were packing bags. faces drained. I felt no joy, no vindictive thrill, just the sense that it was time to end it. Grant started the engine and glanced over. "Let's go, hospital first, then my place. That house is getting locked up." I nodded. The car rolled forward, leaving behind the pale yellow house that had once been a home and then became a crime scene. And in the soft Kansas sunlight that day, I felt one thing clearly. You don't need to shout to win. You just need to stand up straight and stop being afraid. The nightmare was over, and justice, late as it was opening the door. I was admitted to the hospital that same afternoon. The internal medicine doors swung open, and the familiar smell of antiseptic rushed in the scent I'd lived with for over 40 years as a nurse, but now it made me feel strangely small. They put me in a bed, started an IV, checked my blood pressure, drew blood repeatedly. The drip ticked like a clock, slow and steady. I heard Dr. Camila tell the floor nurse, "BP 90/60, severe anemia, elevated BUN, she's on the edge of multi-organ failure. A few more weeks and we wouldn't have made it." I lay still, eyes on the white ceiling. Never in my life did I think I'd hear those words about me. Grant sat beside me, hands clasped tight. He didn't speak, just stood to straighten my blanket now and then, or patted my hand. Whenever I dreamed I was lost in an empty house with no exit, he squeezed my hand harder, pulling me back to the present. On day 3, I fully woke from a fever. Grant was still there, reading a novel he'd brought. A vase of fresh flowers sat on the corner of the table. He looked up when I opened my eyes. "Did you sleep?" I nodded slightly. My voice was weak, but my heart was lighter. It's the first time I slept without hearing them argue. Arthur visited on day 5. Same gray suit, briefcase full of papers. "Good news, Paula," he said as he pulled up a chair. "The court voided the forged POA and the bank approved the freeze. We're restoring the accounts." He opened a tablet and showed me a summary. "We can likely recover about $18,000 to $25,000 from remaining balances and liquidated assets from Sloan Boutique. The rest was basically burned up by the store." I didn't feel regret. I asked softly, "What about the insurance?" Arthur nodded. "We're reversing the beneficiary change. I've filed the formal request, and Nolan no longer has access to the records." Grant put a hand on my shoulder. "See, the tide's turning." I smiled faintly. Harold is probably exhaling somewhere. On day 6, Dr. Camila reviewed my labs. She shook her head, but this time with hope. "Numbers are improving, but Paula, you need at least 6 months of nutritional rehab. Your body's been depleted for a long time. I'll set a special diet and recommend therapy as well." I smiled lightly. "Doctor, I used to teach med students that emotional wounds take longer to heal than physical ones. I guess it's my turn to learn that lesson again." Grant laughed, trying to sound upbeat. "If you're philosophizing, you're doing okay." That afternoon, Arthur returned with another stack of papers. "Paula, I need your authorization to sell the Kansas house. Once everything is finalized, the funds will go into a private account with Grant temporarily supervising." I looked out the window, late sun filtering through the sheer curtain, lighting the small scar on my wrist, a relic from night shifts long ago. I nodded. "Sell it. I don't want to go back there. That house died with my trust." Grant hesitated. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," I said firmly. "I'll stay with you in Denver for a while. I need to learn how to live again before I think about being independent." He just nodded. No objections. Maybe because he knew that, for the first time in years, I was speaking with my own will. That evening, a nurse brought in an envelope. "Someone left this at the front desk." "It's from Nolan Jenkins." I stared at the yellow envelope, the familiar handwriting. Grant moved to open it, but I raised a hand. "No. Leave it." "You don't want to know?" "I already know, Grant. That letter could be an apology, an excuse, or a plea, but every word is too late. I set the envelope aside and turned away. From that moment, I decided to revoke Nolan's visitation. I didn't want to see my son, not to punish him, but to protect the small peace I'd just reclaimed. On day 8, the doctor let me sit up and start walking around the room. Grant supported me step by step, as gently as a brother helping his little sister learn to walk. When I got tired, he brewed herbal tea and read me cheerful bits of news from Denver. A new community garden, a free seniors yoga class, and the corner he planned to set up for me, morning light just right for miniature rose pots. I teared up not for the flowers, but because for the first time someone spoke about my future home without strings attached. On day 9, when the last IV line came out, I felt like my body had been freed. Grant sat across from me, smiling. "Tomorrow you're discharged. Denver, here we come." I pressed my lips together and nodded. "But before we go, I want to do one thing." I took the small notebook from the drawer, the journal where I'd tracked every day, meal, and dollar for 13 months. I opened to the last page and wrote, "Day 274, oatmeal for breakfast, not instant noodles, $0, but the feeling priceless." Grant smiled at me, and I broke down, truly cried, not from pain, but from release. I cried for the cold noodle dinners, the dry crackers that stuck in my throat, the fear that clenched me whenever I heard their footsteps in the hall. All of it was receding, like a shadow shrinking from the last bulb at the end of a tunnel. Dr. Camila came in as I wiped my tears and smiled softly. "Let it out, Paula. That's a good sign. If you can still cry, your heart still knows how to live." I squeezed her hand. "Doctor, you didn't just save my life. You helped me believe life can start over at 70. That night, after everyone left, I turned on the bedside lamp and wrote my new life plan. Health. Walk 20 minutes every morning. Eat 3 real meals. Finances. Open a private account. Share details only with Grant and Arthur. Legal safety. Draft a new will. Define beneficiaries clearly. And authorize the attorney to monitor any changes." I underlined the last line. No one gets to define my worth except me. When I finished, I looked out the window. Kansas streetlights still glowed, painting the sky a soft orange. Inside me, a new light was forming, small but steady. The next morning, Grant arrived early. He carefully packed my things and led me out. Before getting into the car, I glanced back at the hospital, a place I once thought I might never leave. I whispered to myself, "This time, I'm not just leaving a hospital, I'm leaving the weaker version of me." As the car turned off the main road, I closed my eyes. I pictured a simple dinner in Denver, a small table, a plate of steamed vegetables, toast, and warm golden light. No shouting, no contempt. Just peace. Thinking of that, I laughed through tears. I thought I'd lost everything, but now I knew I'd found the most important thing, the light at the end of the tunnel. I returned to the Kansas house, in mid-June, not to live, but to say goodbye. Grant had hired cleaners, painters, and a small furniture company to refresh the place before the sale. They worked hard. Walls painted a creamy white, new window panes, polished wood floors. The house looked almost reborn. But crossing the threshold, I still felt a cold in my chest that no coat of paint could soften. Everything was tidy, but to me, it wasn't a home anymore. The air still held familiar traces, dish soap, oak, and a faint lavender I used to love. Now the scent tightened my throat. Each room echoed with the sounds of my old steps at night, the hollow fridge door, the clink of a spoon against a bowl of cold noodles. Grant said, "You don't have to go in. I'll handle everything." I shook my head. "No. If I don't close this door myself, it'll stay open in my mind." I walked through each room. The living room had a pale beige sofa now. The walls were clean, the lights were bright, but I could still see last. Years' shadow of me there. biting my lip to keep from crying when I heard Nolan arguing. The kitchen shone, the table gleamed, but I remembered every old knife mark where I sliced bread and where they laid out bills I never understood. Arthur arrived while I stood in the backyard. He carried his briefcase, that familiar, calm face. "Paula," he said, "everything is finalized. I've set up a trust to manage the sale proceeds and the monthly repayments from Nolan and Sloan. It will all transfer to you on schedule. No one can interfere." I nodded and thanked him. Grant stood quietly beside me, eyes following my movements. He understood. I wasn't just handing over a house, I was handing over a part of my life. I took exactly 3 things: an old photo frame of Harold, the man who told me, "Don't let anyone use family ties to push you out of your own home," a small box of Nolan's childhood keepsakes, his first roller coaster ticket, a green marble, and a note he once wrote, "I'll take care of you when you're old." And finally, a stack of thank you letters from patients I helped over 42 years, wobbly handwriting, short, but sincere. Those were the memories I chose to keep, the only ones that didn't hurt. When the door shut behind me, I stood on the stoop as a light breeze brushed my hair. A strange feeling slipped in, part sadness, part relief. Grant locked the door and handed the key to Arthur. "That's it," he said. I answered softly, "No, this is the beginning." 3 months later, I was living in Denver. The city had honey gold mornings, dry, clear air, and the smell of coffee on every corner. The little place Grant set up for me sat by a park lined with old elms. My room faced the garden. Every morning I opened the window to sparrows and air with no trace of debt. The Kansas house sold for $230,000, below market a bit, but enough to close the past. After an internal review, the bank refunded $22,000 from fraudulent transactions. Arthur sent monthly reports. Everything was transparent. As for Nolan and Sloan, they made the first 3 payments exactly on time, $1,400 each, full amount, no notes, no contact, and I didn't need anything more. I opened a new account at a different bank with 2-factor authentication. Every login required a code to my phone, the phone I bought myself, in my name, shared with no one. I called it a small symbol of freedom. Arthur helped update my will, everything clear. Grant as financial guardian if I lose capacity. The remainder to a support fund for retired nurses named the Harold and Paula Whitaker Fund. Every morning, I woke at 6 a.m., brewed mint tea, and looked out at the park. I walked around the small lake, met older neighbors, and exchanged gentle smiles. No one knew what I'd been through, and I didn't need them to. I just wanted to breathe, walk, and feel my heart grow, calm again. I relearned to cook the foods I love, not for anyone else, but for me. On day 1, I made chicken vegetable soup with toasted bread. When the scent filled the small kitchen, I burst into tears, not from sadness, but from the feeling of caring for myself. That meal was my first lesson in self-care, something I'd forgotten for 70 years. Grant liked to joke, "You're becoming a new Mrs. Paula." I smiled. "No, I'm just becoming who I used to be, the woman I lost in that family storm." At night before bed, I opened the little notebook now with new pages. I no longer tracked meal amount, but joy reason. September 1st, Joy walked with a neighbor named June. She told me about her flowers. September 2nd, Joy made tomato soup, and it wasn't too salty. September 3rd, Joy slept a full 7 hours. No dreams. I never thought slept 7 hours would make me proud. For 13 months of fear, I never slept deeply always. Half awake, flinching, afraid of doors opening, of strange footsteps. Now I could lie still, breathe in the clean pillowcase, hear the wind tap the window, and smile. One day Grant asked, "Do you ever miss Kansas?" I answered, "No, I only miss who I used to be there, not the place." He nodded and said nothing more. He understood. I kept Harold's photo on my desk. Each night I lit a small candle and told him about the day, not to memorialize, but to remind myself that people have truly loved me. Fall came early to Denver. Yellow leaves covered the porch. The wind carried the scent of coffee and apple pie from the shop across the street. I wrapped myself in the scarf Grant gave me, sat by the window, and watched the sun go down. In that moment, I realized I was living, not just surviving. No more shouting, no more contempt, no more fear of an empty fridge. Just me, a 70-year-old woman learning to love herself again, step by step. I closed the notebook and exhaled. Life, even broken, can keep going. I don't know how many years are ahead, but I know that from now on, not a single day will be taken by anyone or by fear. And when night fell, I whispered like a prayer, "Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Harold. And thank you, wounds. You taught me to stand up." Then I turned off the light. No more IV lines, no more darkness of hunger or guilt, just the first peaceful 7-hour sleep of my new life. I began therapy in early fall on Dr. Camila's advice. She said, "Your body's okay now, Paula. It's your soul's turn." The counseling center was in an old building with pale green walls and windows facing a small park. That first morning, I was a little shaky. I'd always thought therapy was for people who were weak or couldn't control their emotions. But when I met the therapist, Marissa, those thoughts faded. Marissa was around 50, voice light as a breeze, kind eyes that missed nothing. She let me tell the outline of what happened without interrupting, set a cup of herbal tea in front of me, then said something I'll never forget. "What you went through has a name, Paula. It's called financial abuse and coercive control." I went still, she continued, slowly, as if afraid I might not take it in. Financial abuse doesn't need physical force. It's when someone takes control of money, decides spending, or uses finances to make another person dependent. It's a form of abuse, and it leaves invisible wounds. I looked at my hands, these fingers that had cared for hundreds of patients now shaking because of a truth so simple it took me a year to hear. "So, I'm a victim?" Marissa nodded gently. "Yes. But more importantly, you're not in that role anymore." The first session ended with what seemed simple homework. "Write a letter to yourself at 70, Marissa said. "Write as if you're your own friend. Don't worry about grammar, just be honest." That night, at the small desk in my Denver room, I opened my old brown notebook, the one that had recorded hungry days and then small joys. I wrote, "Dear Paula, you are not at fault. You are not weak, not foolish, not to blame. You simply loved the wrong way, trusted the wrong person. That does not erase your worth. People can steal your money, but they can't take your dignity unless you let them. You're still alive, still able to smile, and that's already a win." When I closed the notebook, my hands had stopped shaking. Something rose inside me, self-forgiveness. Marissa encouraged me to rejoin community, to talk, to listen. I signed up for the church book club, where older women met every Wednesday to read and discuss. The first time, I sat in the corner, listening to laughter and the way they argued about characters. Slowly, I began to speak up. One day, when the group read The Color Purple, I shared a bit of my story. The room went quiet for a few seconds, then a silver-haired woman beside me said softly, "I was like you once. My husband kept all our bank cards for 20 years. I didn't think it was abuse until I read this book." We looked at each other. No more words were needed. Just understanding the kind you only recognize in someone who's lived it. From then on, I shared more. I talked about keeping a private account, locking cards, turning on two-factor authentication, reading monthly statements, and not hesitating to ask when something looks wrong. Marissa said, "Sharing experience is a powerful way to heal. When you help someone else out of the dark, that light also shines back on you." I didn't expect that from those small conversations. An idea would slowly take shape. I asked Grant and the church to help set up a small fund for victims of financial abuse, for older women who have no one left beside them. The fund would simply cover temporary housing, legal consultations, and classes to relearn personal money management. I called it Second Light. Because I know not everyone gets the chance to relight their life. My health steadily improved. I ate well, slept deeply, gained back about 22 pounds, my skin started to look healthy, and the hair loss stopped. Dr. Camila called for a check-in. When she heard me talk about Denver, she laughed. "You're getting younger, Paula. Keep this up, and I'll be jealous." I answered. "No, I'm just finally living at my real age, not the age of fear." Grant noticed too. One evening, when I burst out laughing at a comedy show, he looked over at me, half joking, half serious. "You're back." I've been waiting to hear that laugh for 2 years. I laughed even harder, tears in my eyes but still smiling. "And you're still the first one to hear it." Now I can think of Nolan without struggling to breathe. The thought of him still pricks my heart, but it doesn't squeeze it anymore. I've learned this. Forgiveness isn't acceptance, it's taking the weight off your own shoulders. I still haven't read his letter, the yellow envelope lying in my desk drawer. Some nights I look at it for a long time, then set it down. Marissa said, "When you're ready, you'll know. Don't force yourself to reopen a wound that's just begun to close." I listened. I left it there as a reminder that we don't have to finish every story to move forward. In November, I was invited to speak at a small church workshop on preventing financial abuse. I stepped up to the lectern, hands a little shaky, but my voice steady. I used to think abuse only meant violence, but now I understand that sometimes abuse wears the face of love, of someone saying, "Mom, let me handle it," while quietly taking away your right to live. In the audience, a few women nodded, some wiped their tears. I continued, "Financial abuse starts with small things. When they say, 'Give me the card,' it's easier if I manage it. When they forbid you from checking statements because you wouldn't understand. When you ask to buy something and they say, 'What do you need money for?' All of those, added together, are how someone strips away your control." I ended with a smile. But I'm still here. I lost almost everything, and I got myself back. If I can do it at 70, anyone can. As I stepped down, a silver-haired woman took my hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "You just named a pain I was afraid to name for 10 years. I simply squeezed her hand in return. No more words were needed. That night, back home, I sat in front of Harold's photo. A small candle flickered, its light trembling across the wall. I whispered, "Do you see, love? I know how to name my wound now, and I know how to heal it." Then I smiled. Not the forced smile of survival, but a true smile, the smile of someone who has taken back her life. A year passed since I left Kansas. The first winter in Denver was cold, but gentle, the kind of clear cold that makes you want to brew tea and sit quietly listening to the snow outside the window. I kept my old habit, recording each expense and each small joy, as if that notebook were proof I was still living, still in control of my life. That morning, Arthur called. His voice was as calm as always, but I could hear warmth in it. "Paula, I have an update. It's been 12 months since the repayment plan began. As of today, Nolan has paid $16,800, 12 installments, each $1,400. I was silent for a few seconds, looking out the window. A thin layer of snow covered the yard. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or hollow. Finally, I asked quietly, "How much is left?" Arthur flipped through papers. I heard the rustle over the phone. "About $59,000. Under the agreement, if they miss more than 2 consecutive installments, I'll refer the case to the district attorney and trigger criminal charges. I'm holding all the evidence, so you don't need to worry." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Thank you, Arthur. I just want everything to follow the process, no more, no less. He hesitated, then continued. One more thing. Nolan wants to send you a letter, along with notes from his therapist. I've reviewed it, nothing harmful, so I'm forwarding it for you to decide. I thanked him and asked him to mail it. When I hung up, my heart beat strangely fast. I thought I had no feelings left about that name, and still, something twinged. 3 days later, the brown envelope lay on the table. I left it there all morning. Only that evening, after a prayer service at church, did I pick it up. In a quiet room, candlelight shimmering on Harold's frame, I opened the letter with hands that no longer trembled. Nolan's voice appeared on the page, slow, halting, but honest. Mom, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm only asking you to read this. I've been seeing a therapist for 6 months. She helped me see I didn't just steal your money. I stole your trust, your peace, and the image of the mother I once loved most. I wasn't starving. I was afraid of failing, afraid of seeing my wife disappointed. When Sloan said, investing will change our lives, I saw the easy path and I chose the easy and cruel path. Now I know there's nothing easy about carrying guilt. I'm working at a small construction company, 35 hours a week. Every time I send a payment, I feel a little lighter, but it also hurts because I miss you. I don't dare call. I just want you to know, I'm still trying to fix myself. I set the letter down and took a deep breath. No tears, no anger. Just a quiet feeling, as if a storm had passed, leaving a beach strewn with debris, but the wind had stopped. I reread the last paragraph several times. Not because I wanted to believe it, but because I realized this. I could read my son's letter and my hands did not shake. Arthur was right. When you regain control, the numbers speak for themselves. $16,800, each dollar proof that justice isn't an abstract idea, but a repeated action, on schedule, without emotion, without bargaining. I didn't reply right away. The next day, as light snow fell, I sat down and wrote a short letter, just 3 sentences. Nolan, keep paying the debt. Heal. I'm praying you'll learn the worth of an honest dollar. No, love, no, I miss you. But I knew it was the gentlest, most appropriate answer I could give. At the end of the month, Arthur visited during a business trip to Denver. He brought new files, financial updates, and a small envelope. We've locked every channel they could exploit, from linked accounts and insurance to old credit profiles. Everything is now in your name and protected with biometric authentication. No one can access anything without your fingerprint. I smiled. Sounds like a spy movie. Arthur chuckled. In this era, seniors deserve that level of protection. And honestly, it's rare to see someone as steady as you, calm through the whole process. I answered softly. I just don't want to live in fear of someone else's signature ever again. Grant showed up after with a flyer. Look at this. The city library has a digital skills for seniors course, how to spot phishing emails, protect your info, and manage accounts online. I laughed. Are you calling me outdated? He smiled kindly. No, I want you modern enough that no one can trick you again. So I signed up. In week 1, I learned to recognize fake texts, check bank domains carefully, and report suspicious activity. In week 2, I learned to set strong passwords and store data safely. Each feature I understood made me feel a little stronger, as if the walls of a new fortress were going up solid, no more breaches. The instructor, a man in his 30s, said, "The best part is Mrs. Paula isn't afraid to ask questions. People are only weak when they're afraid to learn." I smiled. I was a nurse. If I could learn to stitch wounds, I can learn to protect my digital wallet. That night I went home, brewed chamomile tea, opened my account list on the computer, and looked at the clear, balanced numbers. No one else touching them, no mysterious transfers. Those numbers weren't just money, they were proof of freedom. Grant dropped by and saw me typing a password. He grinned. "You look professional," I said. "Don't forget, I used to run an ICU unit. Online accounts are just digital IV lines." We both laughed. That sound hadn't filled a room so naturally in a long time, unweighted by memories. After Grant left, I sat alone. Outside, snow fell quietly, streetlights reflecting on the window pane. I looked at Harold's photo and whispered, "See, love, I did it. I'm not just surviving, I'm living in peace." Inside me, no resentment, no why. Everything had returned to its place. My son learning how to be decent again, me learning to trust myself. When the clock struck 9 p.m., I closed the laptop, turned out the light, and headed to bed. No fear of being jolted awake at night, no haunting memory of $37, only stillness and safety, the kind I spent a lifetime finding again. I climbed into bed, pulled up the blanket, and smiled into the dark. For the first time, I understood deeply that justice is sometimes not punishment, but the quiet of no longer having to be on guard. I closed my eyes. Outside, the snow kept falling softly, as if the world itself were breathing lightly with me. And in that sleep, I knew, at last, I was truly at peace. Early morning, I made a cup of hot cocoa and stood by the window, looking at the Rocky Mountains blushing with dawn. The sun had just lifted over the far ridge, bathing the room in a gentle, warm light, like a hand resting on my shoulder. Outside, last night's snow was melting on the sill. I heard Grant's footsteps from the kitchen, the smell of coffee filling the air. He leaned on the doorway and asked softly, "What are you thinking, Paula?" I smiled, turning the cup so the steam drifted up evenly. "Wondering what freedom tastes like." "And now I know it tastes like toast with salted butter." Grant laughed. And I laughed too, not the kind of laugh you force to look strong, but a real, simple, weightless laugh. Freedom, it turns out, isn't something grand. It's being able to make your own cocoa in the morning, to spend your own money, to say no without fear of punishment. On the table, a small recorder was waiting. Today I decided to record the final chapter of my journey, not for the court, not for any legal file, but for people who might be quietly living in the dark the way I once did. I pressed record, and my voice came slow and clear. This is Paula Whitaker, 70 years old. A year ago, I lived on half a cup of instant noodles a day, in a house with no furniture. Today, I have a home, accounts in my own name, and I can breathe without fear. I used to think justice meant making someone pay, but justice is actually when you're no longer being taken from. I relearned how to live, how to trust, and most importantly, how to protect myself. I paused, took a deep breath, then continued. If you're listening and you see yourself in this story, know that you're not alone. There are laws, and there are people like me, like Grant, like Arthur, like therapists we understand, and we believe you. Don't stay silent. Don't be ashamed. Help is there, you only need to knock. I stopped the recording, played back a bit, then saved the file titled, "From Instant Noodles to a New Start, The Journey of Paula Whitaker." I smiled, set the recorder down, and felt I had closed a long chapter, not with tears, but with a peaceful breath. At noon, Grant took me to the park nearby. The grass was still dewy. A few kids played with a golden retriever. Denver's air is always clear, as if this place was made for healing. Sitting on a wooden bench, I opened my little notebook and wrote down plans for the next year. I didn't want to run from the past anymore. I wanted to use it to help others. My plan had 3 parts. 1. Give talks at the senior center, sharing a personal financial protection checklist, how to manage PINs, statements, wills, and account access. 2. Join the Second Light Network, providing legal support for older women facing financial abuse. 3. Publish my audio journal not to complain, but to show that getting back up at 70 isn't unreasonable. Grant read it and nodded. Sounds like a recovery plan, I answered, half joking, half serious. No, it's a plan to keep living properly. In the afternoon, as sunlight poured through the curtains, I took Harold's photo from the shelf. In it, he still wore that gentle smile, the one that steadied me for decades. I touched the glass lightly and said, "I saved myself, Harold. Maybe late, but in time. I believe if he were here, he'd be proud. I saved so many people as a nurse, but only now did I learn how to save myself." That evening, a letter from Nolan arrived. The envelope had the familiar handwriting, but this time I didn't hesitate. I opened it and read slowly. No choking, no trembling, just a calm, unlike before. My son wrote that work was steady, he was still paying on time, and he was about to volunteer with an organization that helps victims of financial abuse. I folded the letter and put it in a box. No tears, no anger. Because I know sometimes someone else's remorse isn't a gift for us, it's a reward they need to keep living. Late at night, I turned on the desk lamp and wrote a note for anyone who might find my story by chance. If someone is controlling your money, making you afraid to ask about your own account, if you have to ask permission to buy medicine or food, if you're called useless or told you don't understand the times, stop and remember, that isn't love. That is abuse, even when no fist is raised. But you have the right to live differently. You have the right to keep your own money. And there are people who will believe you and help you. I set down the pen, feeling my heart beat slow light as a dawn breath. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't an instant duty, it's a process. I don't have to force myself to love anyone just to look noble. I only have to stop letting resentment run my life. Outside, the sky turned a soft orange. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. Last night's snow had mostly melted, leaving faint patches like memories. I took a deep breath. Denver's air is dry and cold, but not bitter. The sun slanted low, my shadow shortening the sign of a longer day. Grant came out with a slice of fresh toast. I took a bite. The butter melted, rich and warm. I looked at him and smiled. So this is what true freedom tastes like, ordinary, but so good it brings tears. He simply said, "You deserve it, Paula." I nodded, eyes lifting to the Rockies, where the last rays still stretched across the sky. And in that moment, I knew. My journey wasn't over, it was just changing direction, from survival to guiding those still being starved. I turned and walked back inside. Light spilled through the doorway, washing over every frame, every stack of books, every note I'd reclaimed from my old life. A new day was beginning, and I was finally living fully in my own sunrise. Thank you for staying with me to the very end of this journey. If you're still listening, maybe your heart carries a wound like mine, the wound of being belittled, used, or made to forget your own worth. I only want to say this: you're not alone. There are people like me, like Grant, like so many others who fell, stood back up, and found themselves again. Tell me where you're listening from, a small town or a windy city. Because maybe your story will be the rope that pulls someone else out of the dark. If this story touched you, please leave a comment, like, subscribe, and share, not for me, but for those still suffering in silence who don't yet know there's a way out. I'm grateful for every heart that listened. And I promise, in every story to come, I'll keep telling so anyone who's been hurt can believe. Dignity doesn't fade with time. Justice is never too late. And light always finds its way back.
That baby cried from midnight until morning. You should pick up your grandchild so it can sleep. The old man next door shouted just as I stepped out of the taxi. I froze. I didn't have a grandchild. He pointed straight at my window. I see your daughter-in-law holding the baby every night. A cold shiver ran down my spine. My daughter-in-law, Melanie, could not have a child, let alone hold one inside my house while I was away. That night, I pretended to leave town for a conference, but instead circled back through the rear alley and hid in the dark, cramped attic of my own home. And in that suffocating darkness, I heard the cry of a baby I had never met. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like, so it can reach even further. My name is Marjorie Blake, 67 years old, living in a quiet suburban town in Indiana. My 2-story wooden house sits under the shade of old maple trees, a place so familiar that just by hearing the rustling leaves, I can tell whether rain is coming or sunshine will last all day. After my husband Richard died suddenly from a heart attack, this big house sometimes felt painfully silent. Luckily, my son Calvin brought his wife Melanie to live here with me. I thought it would be a new beginning, a warm little family of 3, even though I still missed Richard's deep voice until it ached. The short 3-day trip to Nashville was a small gift I gave myself after months of feeling worn out. I came home lighter, hopeful, carrying Tennessee cookies for the 2 of them. But just minutes after stepping onto the cracked concrete in front of the house, every bit of peace shattered like a glass falling off a marble counter. I pulled my suitcase across the yard, my hands trembling. Mr. Harris, the old neighbor, wasn't the type to gossip. He was gruff but kind, and he hated noisy kids more than anything. But what he told me, each word felt like a freezing stone in my bloodstream. I unlocked the door. The latch clicked like always, but everything inside felt wrong. No TV on. No Calvin calling, "Mom, are you home?" No smell of Melanie's weekend baking. Only one thing, an unnatural stillness. Melanie appeared from the living room holding a home decor magazine. The moment she saw me, she jolted, dropping the book. "Oh, you're home already? I thought you weren't coming back until tomorrow." Her voice trembled. I smiled politely, keeping my tone steady. "The flight changed. Where's Calvin? At work?" She nodded quickly, her eyes darting repeatedly toward the hallway leading to the kitchen. A hallway that had never been worth glancing at before. I dragged my suitcase inside, but my heartbeat was already pounding. I remembered Mr. Harris shaking his head, insisting that he saw my daughter-in-law holding a baby. Melanie never liked holding babies, not even friends' kids. So why? I decided to approach it gently. "Melanie," I said softly, "the neighbor said, there's a baby in the house." Her face drained of color. Instantly, she froze for a fraction of a second, then scrambled to build an excuse. "Oh, Mom remembers my best friend, right? Jessica. She got abandoned by her husband. She had to bring her baby here for a few days. I was going to tell you, but I didn't want you to worry." Jessica. A name pulled from thin air. Melanie had no best friend named Jessica. And when I asked, "What's the baby's name?" she stalled. 1 second, barely even that. But at my age, 1 second is enough to reveal everything. "Oh, the baby, her name is..." She swallowed hard. "Emily." "Emily?" The name popped out like a pin bursting a balloon. "Fake." I smiled. "Oh, that's cute." But inside, the pieces of suspicion began forming a warped, frightening picture. That night, after a simple dinner, I said I needed to rest early because of the flight. I went to my room, turned off the light, but didn't sleep. I lay still and listened. 11 p.m., silence, midnight, still silence. By 1 a.m., I was starting to think I might be overreacting, but at exactly 2:14 a.m., a small sound brushed through the hallway, then a baby's cry, faint, tired, but unmistakably real. I shot upright, my whole body feeling doused in ice water. The cry wasn't from next door, not from a TV, not my imagination. It was inside my house. Then footsteps, a woman's whisper. "Hush, baby. Don't cry. Don't let anyone hear you." My heart clenched. I recognized that voice. It wasn't Melanie. It was softer, younger, different. I sat in the dark until sunrise, clutching the blanket like it was the only thing holding me together. At 6 a.m., I went downstairs with a calm face. "Melanie, I have to attend a financial workshop in Chicago, 3 days." She seemed startled at first, then relieved, visibly relieved. I rolled my suitcase out the front door, closed it gently, and began a performance I never thought I'd stage at 67. I took a taxi to the train station, got out, circled back through the neighborhood, slipped through a side path behind the houses, entered my own back door with an old spare key Melanie didn't know about. I moved quickly upstairs, climbed onto a wooden chair, and opened the attic hatch. My attic was nothing fancy. Old wood smell, dust everywhere, cobwebs in the corners. But from here, through a thin strip in the floorboards, I could see into the living room and kitchen. I crawled forward, pressing myself into the shadows. My heartbeat thudded like it did when I was young. But I knew. Only this way could I learn what was being hidden under my feet. I lowered the attic door quietly. The heat and stale air hit me instantly. But if I shifted slightly to the left, I could peer through the small crack that had existed for years. A crack even Richard never knew about. This would be my window into the truth below. I sat, opened the small backpack I'd prepared. 2 bottles of water, granola bars, a large power bank, my asthma inhaler, and a fully charged phone. I never imagined I, a 67-year-old widow, would be hiding in my own attic like a makeshift detective. But when something feels wrong, you don't ignore it. Lying flat, elbows braced, I looked through the crack. There was Melanie lounging on the couch, legs propped up, sipping a cold soda, watching a cooking show. Not a hint of stress, not a hint of caring for a distressed friend. I forced my breathing steady, but my heart pounded against the floorboards. She looked me straight in the eyes and lied, I thought. Then it happened. A baby cried. Not a soft coo, a tired, strained cry from a baby only a few months old. Melanie jumped up immediately, not panicked, practiced. She entered the guest room and came out holding a baby boy wrapped in a pale blue blanket. Her movements were smooth, familiar. Nothing like the awkward woman who once struggled to hold a neighbor's kitten. Something icy crawled up my spine. Melanie didn't like children. She never wanted them. Yet here she was, soothing this baby like a mother. I started recording. Every sound, every movement. She fed him, changed him, held him close, whispered things I couldn't quite hear, but then I caught it. "Mommy's here, okay? Mommy's here." Mommy, not Auntie, not Melanie. Mommy. My chest tightened so hard I nearly gasped. When did she have a baby? How long had she hidden it? And whose child was it? I pushed the questions aside. I needed more proof. A little later, she placed the baby down and picked up her phone. Her voice dropped low. "Yeah, it's fine. No, she doesn't know anything. The old woman is clueless. She said she's going to Chicago." Old woman. Not mom, not mother-in-law, just old woman. Then, "Don't call this number anymore. Use the other one. Yes, tonight. Bring the money." Money? A chill spread through me. She walked around the house whispering, too soft for me to hear the words, but not soft enough to hide the tone. A tone of someone making secret plans, someone hiding a double life, someone who didn't care who she hurt as long as she got what she wanted. She hid the baby. She hid a man. She hid an entire second life, right under my roof, the house Richard built from years of sweat. My back ached from the hard wooden boards, but I didn't move. I watched, I recorded, I listened. I wasn't just a mother-in-law anymore. I had become an unwilling witness to something darker than I ever imagined. I tightened my grip on my phone, held my breath, and leaned closer to the crack. I needed more. I needed the whole truth. Before Calvin walked straight into this nightmare, I forced myself to find a deeper breath in the stifling heat, my eyes burning from dust and tears I was holding back. Below me, Melanie was still on the phone, her voice growing smaller as if she was afraid someone might hear. Words like, "Tonight, don't come early, hold him gently, don't let anyone see," sent another cold wave down my spine. I knew I had stepped onto a road with no way back, and the most frightening part was this. I had only seen the surface of the truth. Underneath it, there could be a storm I wasn't ready to name. I stayed silent in the attic until the clock downstairs struck 2 in the afternoon. The air grew thicker by the minute, hot as if the whole roof were breathing down my back. Every time I shifted, the wood beneath me creaked sharply, forcing me to stop breathing so I wouldn't be discovered. But the more I endured, the more certain I became. Something was unfolding down there that my son, Calvin, knew nothing about. Around 2:30, I heard the closet door open. Melanie came out of the master bedroom, and her appearance made me lean even closer to the floorboard gap. She was dressed unusually fancy, a black fitted dress, sharp-pointed heels, her hair curled softly and sprayed until glossy. She even wore the gold earrings Calvin had given her for their second anniversary, the pair she once dismissed as too gaudy, not my style. I watched her reapply lipstick, glance at herself in the mirror, then grab her handbag. Every movement was polished, hurried, the movements of someone going on a date, not a daughter-in-law caring for a friend's baby. As she walked out the front door, I heard music blast from her car, something far more upbeat than anything she'd ever listened to in front of me. The engine faded, and the atmosphere downstairs fell back into stillness. I stayed still a few more minutes to make sure she was far away, but before I could even exhale, something happened that turned my entire body rigid. A door opened, from the outside. The front door opened with a key. Not forced open, not picked. Unlocked with a key. I pressed my ear to the gap. A man walked in. Sneakers, jeans, a fitted t-shirt, moving with the ease of someone who'd entered this place 100 times. He didn't look around. He wasn't worried about being caught. And that terrified me even more. "Mel, I'm coming in." His voice was low, familiar with this house in a way even I didn't feel at that moment. But Melanie had just left, and he clearly knew she wasn't here. That greeting was just habit, something you say when you walk into your own home. He set a bag on the table, took out his phone. When the screen lit up, I saw the newest text message. "Baby, are you free tonight? I miss you." I couldn't hear my own heartbeat anymore. My whole body went cold so fast I had to pull my shirt closer to my chest to keep my heart from breaking open. Baby. The stranger was texting Melanie. There was no doubt now. Melanie was having an affair. He walked straight to the guest bedroom where the baby was sleeping. When he opened the door, the child let out a small sound, then quieted as if recognizing him. The man lifted the baby with perfect ease, even more naturally than Melanie. "Daddy's here. Be good today, okay?" He spoke with a tenderness and familiarity that sent a ringing through my skull. This child wasn't someone's temporary baby, not a foster child, not a friend's. There was only one possibility left, one I refused to say even in my own mind. The man cuddled the baby boy, brushing his nose lightly across the child's forehead. The baby quieted instantly, tiny hands grasping the man's collar like it was the safest place in the world. I even heard him laugh softly, the laugh of a real father. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped my phone, but I forced them steady and switched to video mode. I recorded every movement, every word, every embrace, illuminated only by the weak light filtering up from downstairs. Suddenly, his phone rang. He shifted the baby to his left arm, answered quietly, "Yeah, she left." "No, no one's home. Yeah, see you tonight." I held my breath. Melanie. No one's home, meaning he regularly came here when I wasn't around. He set the baby down, pulled a bottle from his bag, poured formula into a glass container, shaking it while continuing his hushed call. I couldn't hear everything, but enough words slipped into the air. Divorce, get half. She'll definitely get money. She just has to say she can't live with her mother-in-law. I already found the apartment. I felt like someone had shoved me off the attic and dropped me onto solid ground. Melanie wasn't just cheating. She was planning to divorce Calvin for money. And worse, they were using this very house as a hiding place for Melanie's real family. I covered my mouth to keep from sobbing. Every layer of truth peeled back revealed something more rotten, more cold-blooded. I looked again. The man lifted the baby and kissed his forehead. "Daddy's got you both. Mommy just has to deal with that dumb husband a few more weeks." Dumb? Husband? They meant my son. My heart didn't hurt anymore. It felt hollow, frozen. I kept filming, even though my hands were numb. I needed evidence. I needed to protect Calvin. I needed to protect this house, the place where Richard had left the last pieces of his life. The man stayed about an hour, cleaning up, changing diapers, making another bottle. I saw receipts in his bag, formula, wipes, baby toys, all paid for with Calvin's card. They were using my son's money to raise another man's child. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was lie there under a layer of dust, holding my breath, watching. When the man finally left using Melanie's key, I felt like I had lived through a nightmare stretching an entire century. I thought the story had hit rock bottom, but then, when Melanie returned about 2 hours later, I noticed something that made the blood in my veins stop, moving. As she bent down to pick up the baby, I saw her left eyebrow, smooth, unbroken. No faint half-inch scar from last year's accident. The scar I remembered more clearly than her smile. I leaned closer to the crack, looked again. No, that wasn't Melanie. It was a woman who looked exactly like Melanie, but younger, sharper, colder. No scar. And in that moment, a realization struck like lightning. Melanie hadn't been home at all. The woman downstairs was her twin sister. I stayed frozen for so long that my back went numb from pressing against the attic floor. The heat felt like a stiff, dry blanket wrapped around me, but my body barely registered any of it. Every sense I had was locked onto one detail, the scar. Melanie had a thin half-inch scar on her right eyebrow. It happened when she slipped in the bathroom and hit the sink. I was the one who put the little bandage on it with my own hands. I remembered every line of it, every expression she made when she looked in the mirror. But the woman holding the baby downstairs, the woman I'd been watching for 2 days, had a completely smooth brow. No mark. It wasn't Melanie. I pressed my eye to the crack, studying her features under the afternoon sunlight spilling into the living room. Her brows were sharper, her eyes colder, her jawline a bit stronger. 2 different women, so identical that 3 yards away, no one on earth could tell them apart, except me. I felt my body grow colder as the terrible idea formed fully. I forced myself to breathe evenly so I could keep watching. The woman, I'll call her because I didn't yet know her name, held the baby with a detached expression. There was no softness, no affection, just familiarity, routine, obligation without tenderness. She paced through the living room like it was her own apartment, not a house she was borrowing to help a friend. Nothing about her suggested temporary. Everything suggested ownership. A wave of nausea rolled through me. If this wasn't Melanie, where was Melanie? I watched closely, memorizing everything. The confident walk, the way she opened cabinets, how she poured water, how she turned on the stove. None of it matched Melanie's real habits. The slow, sometimes childish way she moved. This woman was sharper, calculated, dangerous. Her phone buzzed. She laid the baby in the bassinet and answered. This time she stood close enough for me to see her face clearly. I zoomed in through the crack. Her face appeared, clear, undeniable. Not Melanie. Sharper lips, colder eyes, a slight smirk, totally unlike Melanie's. I saved the image, time-stamped it, saved another zoomed version. I needed proof. At my age, memory can fail, but photos never do. She spoke into the phone. Yeah, tonight she left. Don't worry. Her voice was smooth, firm. Nothing like the sugary tone Melanie used with Calvin. In every sentence, I heard it. She was used to lying, used to hiding, used to impersonating someone else. A bitter thought rose. Melanie had her twin stand in for her, while she herself ran off with her lover. I inhaled slowly, as if pulling myself back from the edge opening beneath me. If that was true, everything fit. The neighbor seeing Melanie each night with a baby, Melanie disappearing for hours, the man coming and going freely, Calvin noticing nothing because the face in front of him was his wife's face. This entire house had become a stage, and I was the only audience member not in the script. I lay still, feeling betrayal climb into my throat until it nearly choked me. I had cooked for Melanie, held her when she pretended to cry over work stress, believed she was the one who finally made Calvin truly happy after Richard died. And all along, she had treated this home as the backdrop for her double life. I had to stay calm. I checked the time. 3:30. Below me, the woman opened the fridge and began preparing lunch as if it were her home. The baby shifted in the bassinet, and for the first time since hearing him cry, I saw his eyes open briefly. Last night, I only heard the cries, but now I saw his pale brown eyes. He was too young to understand anything, too innocent to know he was lying in the middle of so many layers of adult wrongdoing. I opened my phone again and reviewed the videos and photos I'd taken. I enlarged the woman's face. No scar. Eyes slightly longer than Melanie's, cheekbones higher. I saved another version. This isn't Melanie, I whispered to myself, as if saying it aloud gave the truth the weight it needed for when I faced Calvin later. But I couldn't confront anyone yet. Not now. If I accused her too soon, the real Melanie would have time to erase every trace, and the woman downstairs would have reason to disappear, taking the baby and any evidence with her. I had no idea how far they were willing to go, and I couldn't risk Calvin's safety over a premature confrontation. I needed more. I needed to understand their plan. I needed to know how long they had been doing this. I needed to find out where Melanie really was and what she was doing. I let out a long breath, even though the air here felt like it was slicing my lungs into pieces. The attic was hot, suffocating, but I knew I couldn't leave. I had to stay, had to keep watching. Right then, my phone vibrated with a tiny beep, a text notification. I jolted, quickly flipping the phone face down to hide the light. I opened it again, peeking at the screen. Calvin. "Mom, I'm coming home early tonight. There's something I want to cook for you." I froze. My heartbeat pounded so loudly I thought Melanie downstairs would hear it. Calvin coming home early. That meant he would walk straight into this woman. He would walk into this performance without knowing he was the victim. And if they felt exposed, I had no idea how those two would react. I had to think fast. I had to protect my son without revealing I was watching. But right now, through the crack in the floor, I saw the woman shaking a bottle of milk, soothing the baby while wearing a cold smile. A smile that didn't belong to the Melanie I once knew. I gripped my phone, feeling as if I were holding Calvin's life in my hands. That message was a reminder. I didn't have much time left. If you're still listening and wondering, like I am, how someone could be cruel enough to build an entire performance like this, then tell me where you're watching from in the comments. One small line from you will let me know I'm not alone in this story. I stared at the phone screen again, at Calvin's message glowing like a blade cutting through the chaos in my mind. "Mom, I'm coming home early tonight. There's something I want to cook for you and Melanie." I felt my heartbeat slam against my ribs. Downstairs, the woman wearing my daughter-in-law's face was calmly mixing formula, and the baby in the bassinet breathed softly. None of them knew that message had just crashed into me like an alarm bell. If Calvin came home now, he would see everything, but not in the way I needed. Not enough proof, not enough clarity, just enough for the real Melanie or her twin to erase every trace. Worse, Calvin would be so shocked he wouldn't be able to think straight. I whispered to myself in the dark, "Not yet, not yet." I set the phone on the wooden floor, my palm still trembling. Pressing my ear to the crack, I heard the woman downstairs humming a lullaby, English mixed with a faint southeast accent, something Melanie had never had. I had to reply to Calvin. I had to turn the situation around, and I had to do it without raising suspicion. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and typed, "You're coming home early. That's wonderful, but I'm preparing a big surprise for Melanie. To keep it perfect, I want you to book a nearby hotel for one night. Come home tomorrow, trust me." I stared at the text for a long time. It felt harsh. It felt deceitful, but I had no other choice. Calvin trusted me more than anyone in the world, and that trust made my hands shake worse than anything else. I hit send. Less than 30 seconds later, the screen lit up. "Okay, Mom, I trust you. Whatever you say, I'll do. Call me if you need anything." My eyes stung. A mother never wants to use her child's trust to set a trap. But this time, that trust was the shield protecting him from the betrayal creeping through this house. I switched the phone to silent mode, placed it face down, and looked again through the crack. At the artificial life unfolding below, unaware they were being watched. The strange man, the baby's father, had returned to the living room. He set a large paper bag on the table. Diapers, wipes, formula, brand new toys with tags still on. I recognized the supermarket logo Calvin always used for household shopping. Calvin's money, Calvin's card, Calvin's house, and the woman with his wife's face, but not his wife. I clenched my fists until my nails cut into my skin. The man bent down to change the baby's diaper with the ease of a seasoned father. He wasn't rushed, fumbling, or nervous. He gently talked to the child. "Easy there. Mommy's coming back soon." Mommy? Did he mean the woman downstairs? Or the real Melanie? I didn't know, but that word slid into my mind like another puzzle piece clicking into place. I turned on the camera, recording every move, every word. The baby kicked its legs, giggling softly when lifted. The man held him with genuine affection, kissing his head. I hit record on the audio too. In my mind, the story began connecting. The real Melanie had run off with her lover, likely this man. The woman in the house, probably her twin, was here to fool the neighbors. They wanted Calvin to believe Melanie was home, gentle, busy, still living as his loving wife. And when Calvin returned, they would strike, divorce, split assets, take the house, maybe even more. By nearly 11 p.m., warm yellow lights glowed downstairs. The man, I'd heard the fake Melanie call him Evan, sat on the sofa scrolling his phone while she rocked the baby. I overheard them whisper, "Melanie sent you the money already, right?" "Yes. She said she'll send more after the trip." "Are you sure? We're taking a big risk." "Don't worry. Once she divorces, she'll get half the house. She promised she'll take care of us. Evan, just hold on a little longer." My blood froze like it had been plunged into ice. The real Melanie, my daughter-in-law, was paying her sister to come into my house, impersonate her, care for the child she had with another man, while Calvin worked himself to exhaustion to support their family. The woman lowered her voice. "She's coming back tomorrow. You have to clean everything. Not a single trace left." "What about the mother-in-law?" Evan asked. "She's naive. She won't suspect anything. Let her believe Melanie's babysitting her friend's kid. Once everything's done, she can't do anything." I bit my lip to stop the sob. Naive? Can't do anything? I had treated Melanie like my own daughter, and she talked about me like that? I recorded their entire conversation. Every second was a rope tightening around their scheme. Near midnight, Calvin texted again, "Mom, I booked the room. I'll wait for your signal tomorrow." I placed my hand over my heart and inhaled. Calvin was ready, and I was ready for the final reveal. I opened a draft message and typed, "Come home the moment I send the letter H." I didn't send it. I left it open, ready at the edge of my screen. Just one swipe, one tap, and the truth would explode inside this house. I looked down. Evan and the woman were cleaning up the baby's things, preparing for the real. Melanie's return. A woman I knew would arrive with a face full of victory. Tomorrow, everything would be exposed, but not in their way, in mine. I lay down, angled the camera, and propped my phone on a pair of old shoes. Dust drifted around me as the night breeze slipped through broken roof tiles. I closed my eyes for a few minutes, but I didn't sleep. My body ached. My throat was dry, but my mind was razor sharp. Tomorrow, my son will learn who his wife really is, but not in the cruel way they planned. I would choose the moment. I would pull the final curtain. I would keep Calvin standing. Below, footsteps echoed lightly. The fake Melanie checked the doors. Evan lifted the baby and turned off some lights. In that moment, I knew I was no longer the weak mother-in-law sleeping in the living room like they thought. I was the one they never saw coming, the one watching everything from above, the one holding the key to the pit they dug. And tomorrow, the real Melanie would walk into the very house she planned to steal, and she would find me standing there with the truth in my hands. I barely slept for a few minutes in the thick darkness of the attic. The air pressed against my face like a coarse cloth, but I wouldn't allow myself to drift off. Every small sound from downstairs made my body jerk. I couldn't miss a single moment, not when today was the day the real Melanie returned. Around 4 in the afternoon, a taxi engine rumbled in the driveway. slow, dragging, and familiar enough that I recognized the crunch of wheels on gravel, the sound Calvin jokingly called the afternoon greeting whenever he came home late. But this time, the person stepping out wasn't my son, a tall figure with tied-back hair, sun-browned skin, and a gait far too confident to be a visitor. I crawled closer to the crack, controlling my breath. The real Melanie was home. She wore a sea-blue maxi dress with a slit, her wrists glinting with gold bracelets, a brand-new designer bag on her shoulder, the kind Calvin could never afford. She glanced around the yard like she was checking the safety level before entering. Her eyes behind the sunglasses scanned every corner, careful, calculating, cold. The front door opened from inside. The woman impersonating her rushed out, face tight with worry. The two sisters stood face to face like mirror images, except for one thing. The real Melanie's eyes were sharp as a blade, while the other woman's eyes were timid. Melanie removed her sunglasses and immediately shoved a thick envelope into her sister's hand. Her voice was low but cutting. Even through the floorboards, I shivered. "Here, your share. Don't complain. We agreed." The woman pretending to be Melanie quickly hid the envelope inside her jacket, as if even the air could expose her. The envelope was thick, proof they'd done this more than once. I tightened my grip on the phone and kept recording. Melanie stepped inside, and instantly disgust washed over her face. She couldn't hide it. The house smelled like a baby. Formula, powder, plastic toys. She wrinkled her nose like she'd stepped in filth. "Where's Evan?" she asked. The man appeared from the kitchen, looking awkward. He didn't hug her, didn't smile, didn't greet her warmly, the opposite of how he was with the baby or the twin. They exchanged a bland nod. That told me everything. The baby wasn't Melanie's. Only the twin and the man belonged to this real family hiding in my house. Melanie glanced at the baby's bassinet with visible disgust. Not fear of infants, but fear of the baby's existence in her house. "Clean everything, all of it. Now," she ordered. "Calvin could come back any time." I heard Evan sigh, and the twin nearly stumbled holding the baby as it whimpered. Melanie didn't even turn her head. She faced her sister and practically growled, "And remember, leave no evidence, no diapers, no formula, no toys, not a hair, not a bottle." The three of them burst into frantic cleaning. I filmed every second. Evan stuffing dirty diapers into black trash bags, the twin folding blankets, packing toys into cardboard boxes, the real Melanie standing in the center like a cruel supervisor. There was no affection in her eyes, no gratitude toward her sister, no remorse, only ambition. Melanie snapped mid-cleaning. "Calvin is too easy to fool. All I have to do is act tired, cook a few meals, and he buys every word." I leaned closer, my heart twisting. I had to remind myself not to cry, not to tremble, not to make a sound. Evan let out a cold laugh. "He's a complete idiot. Works all day so we can live here." "Not just that," Melanie added, her voice dripping with cruelty. "When I divorce him, I'll get half the house, and he still thinks I'm a devoted wife." The twins sighed, exhausted. "Melanie, if you leave Calvin, who are you planning to be with? Evan?" Melanie glanced at Evan and smirked, like she already had a bigger plan. "I'll take care of my future. You two just stick to your part." My fingers turned white around the phone. I had cared for her like a daughter. I trusted her. I treated her with the love of a widowed mother pouring herself into her son's little family, and she planned to take everything. I pictured Calvin, his gentle eyes, his kind smile, his determination to protect his family. The pain in me hardened into something else, fierce, sharp, unwavering. I couldn't let my son collapse when he faced this truth. I had to control the timing. I had to protect him from the cruelest blow. I slipped my hand into my coat pocket and touched my phone. The draft was still there. Come home the moment I send the letter H. Just one swipe and everything would erupt. But I needed one more piece. One final detail that would lock their lies shut. Melanie walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and grimaced. "This milk smell is awful. Throw everything out." Her sister hurried. "I already sprayed the room. I washed the mattress. I cleaned the baby's sleeping spot." Melanie sighed like she was speaking to a servant. "Do it again. I don't want anyone to know a baby was ever here." Then she said something that almost made me drop the phone. "Calvin is too soft. If he sees baby stuff, he'll think I'm hiding someone's child. Or worse, he'll want to adopt it. I don't want any burden." Those words weren't just confession. They were motive. Cruel motive. Contempt distilled to its purest form. I looked down again. Evan held the tired baby, patting his back. The infant rubbed his face against his father's shoulder, worn out from being shuffled around. The twin carried a huge trash bag, and the real Melanie, the woman I trusted, stood there as the architect of this entire scheme. I nodded to myself. It felt like I had just closed the final report of my investigation. I had everything: footage, audio, statements, actions, money exchange, the divorce plan, their contempt for Calvin, their contempt for me. I lifted the phone, my finger hovering over the draft message. Calvin was waiting for my signal, and I had waited long enough. But I needed just one more detail. I needed to see the real Melanie's face up close, under the clearest light. That would be the final piece of proof. The thing that separated her completely from her twin. I pressed my eye to the crack again, holding my breath tight in my chest. Below, the real Melanie bent down to tighten the straps on her sandals, her hair falling to one side. No scar, even eyebrows, smooth skin, cold eyes, a mouth shaped like a blade. I hit record, held the camera steady, saved the file. Done. My heartbeat slowed but grew heavier. I wasn't shaking anymore. It was time. I pulled up the draft message. My finger hovered exactly where it needed to be. "Get ready, son. Wait for my signal." Calvin replied in less than 2 seconds. "I'm ready." I looked down at the house, at the 3 people desperately trying to erase every trace of their wrongdoing. I saw Melanie's real face turn toward the window, the afternoon sun sliced across her features, sharp, cruel, unrepentant. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, and I knew. The moment of reckoning was very, very close. I held my phone, my fingers trembling with a mix of fear, fury, and something older, a kind of resolve only a mother pushed to her limits could possess. Below, those 3 truly believed they had erased every sign of what they'd done. They sat resting, drinking water, exhaling like they'd just cleaned a rental unit, not covered up a family crime. This was the moment. I opened the message and sent it. "Calvin, come home now." No emoji, no explanation, no softening. All he needed to understand was this. His mother was calling, and this time it wasn't about dinner. I held the phone in my hand and listened to every sound below. The woman pretending to be Melanie was untying the baby's bib, while Evan ran a hand through his messy hair. The real Melanie sat cross-legged on the sofa, face glued to her phone as if the only thing that mattered were her own messages, not the child lying in the house of the husband she planned to betray. "It's all set," she said smugly. "Calvin will never figure it out." The twin gave a weak, nervous laugh. "You sure?" Of course, the real Melanie muttered without looking up. He trusts me like he trusts God. My chest tightened. Right at that moment, the sound of a key sliding into the lock cut through the air, metal turning, clean, sharp. 1 second later, the front door opened. All three froze. Calvin stepped inside, his face still bright with the excitement of surprising his wife. He held a bouquet of tulips, her favorite, and the smile spreading across his face suddenly died. Because right there in front of him, 2 Melanies, 2 identical women standing in his living room, one holding a baby, one sitting on the sofa, hair perfect, new dress, heavy makeup. Calvin stared, blinking rapidly, then looked around the house. Two of you? He choked out, his voice strangled. The bouquet slipped from his hand and hit the floor. Tulip petals burst apart. Evan backed against the wall, color draining from his face. The twin clutched the baby tighter, as if it could shield her from reality. The real Melanie jumped to her feet, forcing a twisted smile. Calvin, I can explain. But she didn't get the chance, because I stepped down. The attic door clicked softly open. The creak of the hinges sliced through the tension like a blade. Each of my footsteps down the stairs felt like the countdown of a bomb. I walked into the center of the living room. Calvin stared at me, confused. Mom, you were in the attic? I nodded, keeping my expression calm even though my heart was pounding like a war drum. I was there, I said slowly, evenly, for 4 days. The real Melanie's eyes widened. You were doing what up there? I looked straight at her, into the eyes I once believed belonged to the daughter I gained through marriage, watching, recording, filming everything. Calvin staggered. Mom, filming what? I took my phone from my pocket. In the dead silence, the sound of my thumb tapping the screen was as loud as a pin drop. I pressed play. Their voices filled the room. Melanie calling Calvin an idiot. Evan saying his money. The twin accepting the envelope. Their entire plan to divorce and steal the house. Calvin looked like he'd been slapped across the face. The real Melanie lunged to grab my phone, but I stepped back and held it close to my chest. Don't touch me, I said, my voice slicing through the room. Evan spoke up quickly. It was just a misunderstanding. I turned to him. What kind of misunderstanding requires 2 identical women and a hidden baby in my son's home? He shut his mouth. I turned back to Calvin, my voice softening but still steady. Son, I heard everything. I saw everything. I have enough evidence to hand straight to the police or a lawyer, whatever you choose. Calvin stood frozen, eyes red. Why? He whispered, Inya, barely audible. Melanie. Why? The real Melanie flinched. She glared at me with hatred, not regret, as if I had ruined her life, not her own betrayal. She pointed at her twin. She helped me, that's all. I stepped closer to the 2 identical faces. Then I pointed at the twin's eyebrow. My daughter-in-law Melanie has a scar here. When she was 14, a coat rack fell on her. A small scar, but permanent. I shifted my gaze to the real Melanie. But you, I said slowly, don't. Calvin's eyes darted between them. He looked closer and closer. His voice cracked. You don't have a scar. He turned to the twin, shaking. So, who has been living with me these last 4 days? The twin burst into tears, clutching the baby. I only did what Melanie told me. I just needed the money. Evan covered his face, stepping back into a corner. The real Melanie. She finally met Calvin's eyes with nothing left to hide. She broke into tears, not grief, but the tears of someone caught red-handed. Fine, fine, I want a divorce, she screamed. I'm done with all of this. I don't love you. I want my life. I want him. She pointed at Evan. I want to be with the man I chose. Calvin staggered. I rushed to steady his arm. His breathing came fast and uneven. What did I do wrong? He whispered. I just wanted to love you. Melanie sneered. You didn't do anything wrong. You're just boring. No ambition, not enough for me. I bit my lip to stop myself from crying. Her cruelty toward the gentlest man I had ever known made my hands tremble with rage. Calvin pressed a hand to his forehead, voice breaking. You used my house to raise someone else's child? Melanie snapped back. It's his child, she pointed at Evan, but that's not your concern anymore. We're leaving. This isn't my home. I turned toward her. No, Melanie, the moment you stepped into this scheme, you forfeited the right to call this your home. She glared at me like a trapped animal. You have no right. I kept my voice calm. I have every right when it's my son who has been hurt. She couldn't respond. The twin cried harder. Evan hung his head, and in the thick silence of a collapsing lie, Calvin took a deep, shaking breath, fragile, but stronger than before. Get out of my house, he said, each word heavy as stone. Now. All three stared at one another in panic. I stood beside my son, holding his hand, and I knew this moment wasn't just the end of their scheme, it was the moment Calvin was finally free. I hadn't even caught my breath yet when the woman pretending to be Melanie clutched the baby tightly to her chest, whispered something to Evan, and the two of them scrambled toward the back door. Neither of them dared look at me or Calvin. They just wanted to get out of the house as fast as possible, like ghosts exposed under broad daylight. I heard the back door close with a sound so soft that if every nerve in my body hadn't been stretched tight, I might not have realized they were gone. No baby, no Evan, no more performance left to save the situation. Only the real Melanie stood in the middle of my living room, her face twisted after having the mask she'd worn for so long ripped away. She trembled, then suddenly jabbed a finger at Calvin, as if he were the one who caused every disaster she had brought upon herself. "It's all your fault!" she shrieked, her voice so sharp it made my ears sting. "You're always working, working, working. Do you ever care what I want? Do you ever ask what I need?" Calvin didn't answer. He just stood there, his hand still trembling, like the world had collapsed right in front of him and he didn't have the strength left to hold it up. Melanie stepped closer. Tears streamed down her face, but there was no remorse in her eyes, only anger at being exposed. "You made me feel like I was living in a box, always controlling, always demanding. I'm not the kind of woman born to live in someone's shadow," she screamed, then spun toward me as if searching for another target to unload her humiliation on. "And you," she pointed directly at me, "you think you were so good to me? No, you were always watching me, always judging me, always breathing down my neck. You wanted me to live the way you wanted, to be obedient, to be the perfect daughter-in-law." I stood still, gently placing a hand over my chest to keep myself calm. At my feet, the tulip petals Calvin had brought home lay scattered across the floor. Flowers meant for sweetness and family, now crushed beneath chaos. Calvin stayed silent. No rebuttal, no defense, no blame. His silence hurt more than any shout could. I saw his shoulders tremble, his forehead dip, as if he were trying to swallow something even more bitter than betrayal, the shame of loving the wrong person for far too long. Melanie grabbed the small suitcase she had hidden behind the sofa. She opened it and threw in the rest of her belongings without bothering to fold them, each item hit the suitcase like fragments of a marriage shattering to pieces. Shoes, makeup, scarves, the sweater Calvin bought her last Christmas. "You're weak, Calvin. You never understood what I wanted. And you—" She shot me a glance as sharp as a knife. My hands trembled, but not from anger, from heartbreak for Calvin. He didn't deserve any of those words, especially from the woman he had given his whole heart to. I saw him touch the wall as if to steady himself. His head dropped, his shoulders collapsed. No tears, no cries, just the silent collapse of someone watching his greatest faith come undone. Melanie kept going, as if blaming us would somehow save the last scraps of her dignity. "I have the right to be happy. I have the right to find a man who truly loves me. I have the right to live my own life," she shouted, her voice hoarse. Not from grief for Calvin, but from the humiliation of being unmasked. She dragged the suitcase to the door, then turned back one last time. This house, this marriage, it was all a prison. No one answered her. She opened the door. The afternoon sunlight cast her shadow long across the floor. She walked out with stiff shoulders, not the proud posture of a winner, but the rigid stance of someone defeated, clinging to the remnants of her pride. The door slammed shut. In the wide room, only Calvin and I remained, wrapped in a silence heavy as stone. Calvin collapsed to the floor, like a child who just lost the thing he trusted most, like a man who didn't know how to face this kind of fall, like someone trying to breathe but unable to. I walked over and sat beside him. Tulip petals lay scattered around us, crushed and torn like Calvin's own feelings. I placed a hand on his shoulder. He lifted his face to me, eyes red and full of pain. "Mom, I was stupid, wasn't I?" His voice cracked. I shook my head and pulled him into my arms like I used to when he came home bullied in grade school. "It wasn't your fault," I whispered. "It wasn't because you weren't enough. It's because she was never honest from the beginning." Calvin leaned against me. His breath came hot and uneven, like someone who had just run through a long war. I stroked his hair, my heart aching and relieved at the same time, aching for what he had endured, relieved that the truth was finally out, that no more lies were clouding his heart. "Mom," he murmured weakly, "I don't know what to do." "You don't have to do anything," I said. "Just breathe. Let it pass. Tomorrow you'll be stronger, and then you'll know what to do." He nodded faintly, resting against me like he did as a little boy falling asleep on my shoulder after a fever. I looked around the living room, once warm, once full of evening laughter, once a place where he and Melanie shared small joys. Now it was only an empty space, echoing with the betrayal just uncovered. I placed a hand on his back, feeling each unsteady breath. One painful chapter had closed, but I knew the next chapter wouldn't be any easier. Divorce wasn't just a signature, it was a battle, a confrontation between hurt and restraint, between truth and deception. And I had a feeling the things the real Melanie left behind would bring even more storms. I squeezed Calvin's shoulder. "You're not alone. I'm here. We'll get through this." He nodded, eyes closed, letting his tears fall onto my hand. Outside, the evening wind rustled softly, sweeping away the dust of a chaotic day. But I knew the real storm had only just begun. In the first days after Melanie left, my house became so quiet that sometimes I opened the windows wide just to hear the cars outside, to reassure myself I hadn't slipped into another world. Calvin barely spoke. I heard his footsteps going from his bedroom to the kitchen and back again. Slow, heavy, like someone missing a piece of himself. At night, I heard the creak of his bed as he tossed and turned. Sometimes I stood outside his door, hand on the doorknob, wanting to go in, but I stopped myself. Some wounds can only be healed from the inside. All I could do was the one thing I knew I could do well: keep the house warm with my presence. I cleaned the living room, packed Melanie's leftover things into a small box, and set it in the garage. I washed all the bedding, opened the curtains so the morning sun could spill in. I cooked Calvin's favorite meals: chicken soup, roasted beef, mashed potatoes. Some days he couldn't eat. He would just stare at his plate like it was an empty space. Some nights I heard him quietly crying in his sleep. Other nights he jolted awake, gasping like he'd run through a nightmare. I went in, placed a hand on his shoulder, and let him rest his head on me like when he was a boy. One morning, after nearly 2 weeks, he sat at the kitchen table, looking exhausted but, finally, not hollow. He pushed a glass back and forth between his fingers. "Mom, this marriage, it was never real," he said in a raw voice. I sat beside him. He looked at me as if searching for confirmation in my eyes. "From beginning to end," he continued, "I was the only one who meant anything, the only one trying. She was never on the same wavelength." It wasn't the voice of someone clinging to the past. It was the voice of someone finally understanding why his heart had been cracked so deep. 3 days later, he told me he had filed for divorce. I wasn't surprised. Calvin was gentle, but he wasn't weak. Once he saw the truth clearly, he never stepped back. He also submitted his resignation. I remember the moment he stood in front of the mirror, removing the tie he'd worn nearly every day for 8 years. He set it on the bed, touching it one last time, like a farewell ritual. "Mom, I don't want that environment anymore," he said. "I tried so hard to be the kind of man who could provide everything, but in the end, I lost myself." I replied, "You don't owe anyone the version of you that costs your soul." A week later, he found a new job at a supermarket 10 minutes from home. It paid much less, but when he came back after work, he wore a soft, genuine smile, one I hadn't seen since the day he married Melanie. We started fixing the backyard. Spring came early here, bringing the smell of wet soil and new leaves. Calvin knelt to pull weeds Melanie once called ugly. I asked him what he wanted to plant. He stared at the empty patch of dirt like he was staring at his own healed heart. "Whatever flowers you like, Mom." My throat tightened again. In the evenings, instead of hiding in his room, Calvin sat with me in the kitchen. We cooked simple meals Melanie once mocked as boring. Calvin began smiling again, small, brief smiles, but real. Each one made my chest lighten a little. One night he said, "Mom, I think I finally slept 4 hours straight." I had to pause and breathe before I could answer. He cared more about his hair, his clothes, wiping the table, making tea before bed. Little things that had disappeared when he spent all his energy trying to satisfy a wife who never intended to appreciate him. One afternoon, while I was picking vegetables in the yard, he stood beside me holding a watering can. He looked at the tiny carrot sprouts breaking through the soil, then sighed, the relieved sigh of someone slowly reclaiming himself. "I thought I was going to fall apart, Mom," he said. I looked at him, my hands smelling of earth. "You didn't fall apart," I replied. "You're just standing up a little slower." He lowered his head and smiled faintly. But even with those glimmers of light, the emptiness hadn't completely left. Sometimes he stood by the window for a long time, staring at the front yard as if checking whether life was moving forward. Sometimes he stopped mid-step, holding a plate and forgetting what he meant to do with it. Sometimes he sat on the porch, listening to the leaves rustle, needing the quiet to rest his heart. I didn't push him. I let him heal at his own pace. One rainy evening, after dinner, there was a knock at the door. Not urgent, not loud, but persistent. 3 knocks, hesitant, then 3 more. My spine chilled, not in fear, but in recognition of something inevitable. Calvin put down the dish he was drying. I set the towel aside. We exchanged a look. The rain poured harder outside. A 4th knock. We both froze. "Mom, who would come at this hour?" he asked. I didn't answer. A heavy, uneasy intuition settled into my chest. Calvin stepped toward the door. I followed him. He grasped the doorknob, hesitated a second, then opened it. A cold gust of wind blew into the house, and with it, a thin, soaked silhouette standing on the steps. It took me a few seconds to recognize her, not because she was unexpected, but because nothing about her resembled the proud Melanie I once knew. She was drenched head to toe. Her hair hung in tangled clumps across a face pale and bare without makeup. Her designer dress was torn. Her clothes clung to her like a second skin. One heel remained, the other gone. No purse, no jewelry, no touch of glamour left. She looked like she had walked through a storm, not just of weather, but of fate. She opened her mouth, but only a trembling breath came out before she collapsed to her knees on our doorstep. "Calvin," she whispered, her voice breaking like the wind itself. "Please, help me." Calvin stood still, his hand frozen on the door. I watched his expression twist, pain, shock, and above all, exhaustion. Melanie braced herself on the step, rain dripping off her chin. She lifted her swollen eyes to him. "I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry," she choked out, reaching weakly for his pant leg. "I have nowhere to go." Calvin stepped back half a pace. He didn't push her hand away, but he didn't bend down either. He just watched her like a stranger. I stood beside him, silent. Some choices a mother cannot make for her son. Melanie tried to stifle her sobbing, but suddenly burst into a raw, jagged cry. "He left me," she wailed. "Evan left me. The moment my money was gone, he blocked my number, disappeared, didn't leave anything. Not a word." Calvin frowned. Maybe he wasn't surprised, but hearing her admit it out loud made the air even heavier. Melanie's hands clenched together, her nails pressing into her skin until they turned white. "I went to her house. I thought at least our family would still stick together." She gasped, her voice shaking. "But she wouldn't take me in. She said I only use people. Said I only call when I need something. Then she slammed the door in my face." Her shoulders dropped, rain mixing with her tears. "I don't have a home. I don't have friends. I don't have anything left." I looked at her. The woman who once hurt my son, who once stood in this very house with cold pride, now kneeling on my tile floor, tattered like a wet leaf, blown down in a storm. There wasn't even a flicker of satisfaction in me, only a deep sadness, the kind that comes when you realize everything that never needed to happen happened anyway, and none of us won. Calvin finally spoke, his voice low and worn, like he had walked a long, hard road. "Melanie," he said slowly, "where's your lover?" The question sliced straight through the air. Melanie burst into louder tears, her voice twisting. "He doesn't want me anymore. When I told him I had no money left, he took everything, my ring, my purse, then pushed me out of the car. I was such a fool." Calvin tightened his grip on the doorframe, but instead of anger, there was a heartbreaking kind of understanding in his eyes. Melanie bowed her head, her shoulders trembling. "Calvin, I'm sorry," I thought I could have a better life. I thought his love was real. I thought I deserved more. But in the end, I have nothing." She looked up, her eyes full of water. "Please, don't leave me out here in the rain." Calvin exhaled. It was a long, tired breath, the kind that made my own chest tighten. Then he knelt so he was at her eye level, but still kept a small distance, like a line he no longer wished to cross. "Melanie," he said, his voice strangely calm, "I don't hate you." She lifted her face, stunned. He continued, "I don't want you dying out on the street. I don't want you spending the rest of your life paying for one mistake." Melanie sniffled, her hands gripping his pant leg harder, as if trying to hang onto her last thread of hope. "I don't hate you," Calvin repeated softly, "but I'm not going back." She froze, as if his words had taken the remaining breath out of her chest. Calvin stood up and gently helped her rise from the cold, wet floor. "I know a place that might take you in," he said. "The church kitchen. They need helpers. The pay isn't much, but it's steady. They also have temporary shelter for women in trouble." Melanie opened her mouth, but her voice cracked into an unintelligible sound. Calvin walked inside, grabbed one of his old jackets and draped it over her shoulders. The jacket hung loosely, absorbing the rain right away, but it still shielded her from some of the cold sinking into her bones. He opened the trunk of his car, took out an old umbrella, and waited for her to step down from the porch. Melanie bowed her head deeply, choking out, "Thank you. Calvin, thank you." Calvin nodded, saying nothing more. He led her to the car and opened the door for her. Before closing it, he handed her a small tissue. "Take care of yourself," he said softly. So softly the rain almost drowned it out. "Start over. You still have a chance." The car door shut. Calvin walked around to the driver's side and turned on the headlights, their glow stretching across the curtain of rain. I stood under the porch, watching them through the storm, my heart heavy, but peaceful at the same time. Calvin had chosen kindness, even after being hurt so deeply he almost couldn't stand again. The car rolled down the driveway, leaving a faint trail of light behind in the thick rain. When the taillights disappeared behind the wet trees, I gently closed the door, my hand on my chest as if trying to steady my own heartbeat. Melanie was gone. Calvin was standing tall, and I knew from this moment forward my son's life was turning to a new page, cleaner, truer, and written by his own hand. After Calvin dropped Melanie off at the place where she could start over, he returned home when the rain had eased, but the cold lingered. I heard the front door open, the sound of him hanging his coat, then his steady but tired footsteps entering the living room. No more shaking, no more panic like the early days, just the exhaustion of someone who had closed an old chapter and was ready to meet the next one. I placed a pot of hot tea on the table, the steam rising softly with the scent of mint. Calvin sat on the worn but comfortable armchair, rubbing his forehead like he was trying to push out the last remnants of everything that had happened. "You're still awake?" he asked, his voice low and gentle. "I was waiting for you," I answered, because it was true. I couldn't sleep knowing my son was driving through the rain with the fragments of his past in the passenger seat. He stared at the cup of tea for a long moment, as if sorting through his thoughts. Then he released a quiet sigh so light it nearly dissolved into the air. "It's over," he said. I nodded. No questions, no digging into the details. It was enough to know that my son had survived the lowest valley of his life and now was climbing back up. We sat in silence, sharing the warmth of the tea. It wasn't the heavy silence from months before. It was a healing silence, like fresh air slipping into a house after a long winter. The weeks following that rainy night moved slowly, as if the house itself was learning how to breathe again after being suffocated by suspicion and lies. Calvin began his new job, a smaller office, less pressure, fewer late-night meetings. He didn't earn as much as before, but every time he opened the door and stepped inside with a calm, steady look, I knew he had made the right choice. In the mornings, I woke earlier to make coffee. The smell filled the kitchen, familiar yet somehow more peaceful. Calvin would stop by the stove, his hair still messy and his shirt half-buttoned, to pour a little coffee into a travel mug. "I'll be home early," he'd say. And he kept that promise. There were no more long nights of waiting, no more late messages saying he had to stay at the office, no more cold dinners I had to pack away because my son was too exhausted to come home. I realized pain might break us down, but it can also push us onto the path we were always meant to take. Calvin changed little by little. He went out to the garden every afternoon wearing gloves, crouching to tend to the leftover winter plants. I joined him, picking dried leaves and trimming the bougainvillea, listening to the clean snip of pruning shears like a new heartbeat for the house. One day he stopped working, sat down on the damp grass, and tilted his face up to the sky. "You know, Mom," he said, for the first time in years, "I feel like I can breathe." I looked at him. Not the broken man who collapsed on my living room floor months ago, but someone rebuilding himself from the inside out. That gentle rhythm settled into our days like a small bird landing on a branch. Not strong yet, but steady. One afternoon, as I folded laundry in the living room, Calvin walked over and stood in front of me. "Mom," he said, his voice deepening, "you saved my life." I froze. The fabric slipped from my fingers without me noticing. Calvin never expressed feelings easily, but at that moment his eyes were so sincere, it made my throat tighten. "If it weren't for you," he paused, swallowing whatever was stuck in his chest. "If you hadn't seen what was wrong, if you hadn't been patient, I might still be living in lies. I might still be throwing myself into work just to support a life that wasn't mine." I placed my hand on his chest. "Son," I said softly, "I didn't save your life. I only pulled you out of the flood. You're the one who chose to walk back to solid ground." He lowered his head, smiling, a smile not of someone escaping pain, but of someone growing from it. The house changed little by little, not from renovations or new furniture, but from the energy inside it. Before, every corner felt like it held a sigh. Now the smallest sounds were precious. Birds beating their wings outside, Calvin opening a book in the living room, the spoon tapping the side of my cup. Some mornings, sunlight streamed through the east wall and onto the kitchen as we prepared breakfast. I looked at that light and realized it was the first brushstroke of a new chapter. This house had once smelled of betrayal. Now it smelled like toast and freshly brewed coffee. Every corner held the warmth of people who cherished peace. I realized sometimes the light doesn't come from changing a house. It comes from changing the hearts of those who live in it. One day, Calvin cleared out Melanie's old room. He gathered all the leftover items, scarves, a stray perfume bottle, shoes forgotten behind the dresser, and placed them into a box. He carried the box to the car, but when he stepped back inside, I saw him pause at the doorway, staring at the floor for a long moment. "Do you have regrets?" I asked. Calvin shook his head. "No, Mom. A marriage built on lies was never real to begin with." He looked up, his eyes clear. "Falling apart isn't failure. is just a reminder that I chose the wrong person to trust with my love. A gentle relief opened inside my chest, the kind any mother longs to see in her child. One quiet evening, Calvin and I sat on the back porch. The string lights glowed warm and soft. The jasmine in the corner of the garden carried its scent with the wind. Calvin leaned back, holding a cup of tea, looking so calm that I could picture him many years from now, steady, mature, strong. "You always said every pain has a purpose," he said. "Now I get it. No one wants to hurt, but sometimes pain pushes you to the place you're meant to be." I smiled and answered slowly. "Pain doesn't exist to trap you. It exists to guide you back to your rightful path." Calvin set his cup down and leaned his head gently on my shoulder, just like he did when he was a boy. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered, "for seeing what I couldn't." I wrapped my arm around him, watching the warm light sway gently in the breeze. In that moment, I knew clearly. We had walked through the storm, and now we were standing in the calm. I don't know what the future will bring, whether Calvin will meet someone new or open his heart again, but I know this: my son has healed. Not healed by forgetting the pain, but healed by accepting it, growing from it, and no longer blaming himself. We began the next chapter of our lives, not loud or dramatic, but quiet, whole, and true. The light had returned to our home, and this time I knew it would stay. As I write these words, the house is wrapped in the gentle quiet of a late afternoon. Sunlight slips through the white curtains, casting a warm, honey glow across the wooden floor, reminding me of everything we've lived through, things I once thought I could never survive. I share this story not to condemn anyone and not to reopen wounds that have finally closed. I write because I've learned something. Sometimes the darkest shadows in our lives come not from storms or strangers, but from the people we once held close, trusted deeply, and imagined would stay forever. But I also learned this: light works the same way. It comes from the people we love most and from the strength we carry even when we think it's gone. The day Calvin walked through his pain and stood up again, I realized something simple and profound. Loss isn't always the end. Sometimes it's the stone that had to roll off the path so we could finally see the road that truly belongs to us. I think of mothers everywhere, those who suffer quietly, observe quietly, ache quietly for their children. I think of people whose kindness becomes the very gap others take advantage of. And I think of those watching my story right now, maybe carrying their own hidden battles. If you're going through something similar or even worse, I want you to know your pain doesn't define your worth. It only says you loved deeply, trusted honestly. Sometimes the cracks in your heart are where the light enters. I'm not a strong woman. I'm just a mother. A woman who's lived long enough to know that love doesn't always protect us from hurt, but it can lead us out of it. Calvin and I made it through that storm, not as victims, but as two people learning to stand after being knocked down. So if my story stirs something in you, if you've lived through your own dark chapters, I would truly like to hear it. Not to judge, but to remind you you're not alone. Where are you watching this from? Your city, your state, or your country? Tell me in the comments. I value every word you share. Knowing someone out there is listening to my story is a comfort more precious than you might imagine. If this story touched you in any way, lightly or deeply, I invite you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join me for the next ones. Not for views or numbers, but because I hope we can continue to meet each other through stories with both shadows and light, reminding us that life always has two sides. Thank you, truly, for staying until the very end. In a fast, noisy world like ours, having someone sit down and listen to a woman like me is a gift I never take lightly. I wish you courage, peace, and a warm home that truly feels like yours on your journey through life. And if one day you find shadows creeping into the places you trust most, remember that the light is close too. You just have to keep reaching for it.